Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Bill Whittle, and it's good to be here on the 11th of July. Shut up, you idiot. Hope everybody is doing well. Let's see, we could probably use a little more light in here, I guess. Oh, it's probably the white shirt reflecting all of this jazz back. In any event, hope everybody's doing well. This is a cat t-shirt, yes. Here it comes already. I am really happy to be here, happy to be able to do, it's 7-Eleven. Well pointed out, Eric. Blake points out it's 7-Eleven. And before I forget, I'd just like to congratulate Sarge, who is retiring tomorrow, longtime Stratosphere Lounge associate. And I don't know how long you've been doing what you're doing, but I'd be willing to bet it's a while. And if I know my people, and I do, you certainly deserve the rest, and congratulations on a long career. Now you can start to really have fun and do some good things. Do you ever find yourself just like suddenly really thirsty, and I'm a bit thirsty. You take a drink and then you can't stop drinking. No, me neither. All right, so let me see. I'm really in love with this. Something's a little funny, but we'll worry about that later. You want a little more gain? Gain. Oy. Ooh. Okay. Anyway, congratulations, Sarge. I can't wait to hear about what you're going to do in the Unreal world, and it's been just such a pleasure having you here, and looking forward to having you here for a long, long time. Well, finally, I get to talk about a little bit about the Apollo stuff since it's actually been released. And I suppose it's possible that there are some people who have not seen the Apollo trailer. I find it virtually impossible to believe it. Nevertheless, I do. And I was going to preset this, but I can't, so I'm going to drag it into the window. It's just a minute long because I do want to talk about this a little bit. We get a chance to riff around a little bit before we get to work. So let's see if this will do what it's supposed to do here.
Apollo 11, this is Houston.
Welcome to Apollo 11 Mission Control. What's left of it anyway? The space race. 12 years of open warfare between two superpowers.
The United States and the Soviet Union.
We used our best missiles, our best pilots.
Scientists and engineers.
We employed aircraft carriers, radar stations, all the military hardware we had to defeat our ideological nemesis, when each team had over 20,000 nuclear warheads apiece. The space race was the defining act of the second half of the 20th century.
Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement.
50 years ago, men from planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. You owe it to yourself and to history to experience the space age from the inside and see how it took hundreds of small steps to get to that one giant leap. I'm Bill Whittle, and this is What We Saw. I am quite fond of that. By the way, just out of memory, for all the years we used Ustream, trying to set that clip up on Ustream would have taken better part of 15 minutes of dead air. I just pull it into the window, it plays, and then the second it's over, it comes back to the live picture. Thank you, Foghorn, for recommending this awesome software, OBS, streaming software. It's great. So anyway, I want to, during the, we usually take just 1 or 2 minutes, which end up taking about an hour, on some subject, and I want to talk Apollo, and not just Apollo. My point is I get to finally talk about the project, which I've not been able to really talk about much before. So let me tell you what it consists of. It's 4 segments, 3 segments of 1 hour, and then the final segment, the Apollo 11 and after segment, is almost 2 hours. So it's 5 hours of writing. I did the math. Generally speaking, there was some, I forget what the numbers were exactly, but your typical firewall is 12 or 1,300 words. This was 42,000 or something. and it came out to something like 39 firewalls worth of work. I had a chance to tell Jeremy Boring, who made me the offer on this, who I've been working with and who's been a good friend of mine since I met him back in 2008, early 2008. I got a chance to text him after I saw the rough cuts I saw the rough cut of all three except for part 4. When I finished with the rough cut of part 3, and the editors had added so much stuff, I'll make a reference to Apollo 7, and they'll find footage I'd never seen, or they'll insert the Apollo 7 team is now, it just news clips. It's unbelievable. And I got a chance to text Jeremy and say, I've been doing these videos for about 10 years now, since I started with the atomic bomb afterburner. And for that entire time, I've had to live under the weight of having the best thing I ever did be the first thing I ever did, and in another week, that's not going to be true anymore. It's just tremendous, tremendous. If I do say so myself, mostly because they put so much work into it. The set is mind-boggling. Let me get a still of the set. I'll just tell you something just real quick here. Here we go. It's not a great shot of the whole set, but it'll give you the vibe. Hey, look at that. Just comes right in. You've seen the set, and we've got just in back of me. There's a very, very good high-level museum quality Apollo moon suit replica, and then there's also very high quality Apollo control console. But you saw the room in the clip and everything, and I kind of came up with this whole backstory. Actually, come to think of it, I'd like to see if I can find one just real fast with a little more of the background. I guess I can show you guys a couple of behind-the-scenes shots here. I've probably shown them already. Here we go. Let's just have a look at this one. Hey, look at that. Hang on a second. This is working too. That would be you. Sorry about this. But there's a point I kind of want to make here for a change. You get this. You get the gist. There it is. That's most of it. Okay, so in the back there is the cool Apollo stuff. There's the suit and the Apollo consoles in the back, and it's flashing and stuff. And I actually couldn't help myself. I just started writing, like backstory for this, and the backstory basically is something like this. Let me just clear this off here. Delete that, yes. I love that picture. My wife took both of these. She's such a great photographer, and I'm very, very proud of all of those things. Come on, you can go away. Come back. Hello. Yes, I want to delete you. Goodbye. Okay, so here's the backstory. I just came up with this. I was sitting on the set waiting for the audio guys or something like that, and I looked around and I thought, okay, so probably not a lot of people know this on account of it not being true, but back during the Apollo program, actually brought it into place during the Gemini program. They had buried a backup control center deep inside a mountain. It wasn't Cheyenne Mountain. That would be too obvious. Let's just say a mountain, several miles deep inside a mountain. And what it was the backup for mission control if in the event of a nuclear attack during a mission. This would allow us at least to keep the basic telemetry together in order to get the guys home. So my dad took me down there to visit in 1969 because I was so deep into the whole space thing. And then there was some kind of an alarm, and I was down there for 50 years. So I just grabbed a suit off the rack, and I've kind of been down there for about 50 years, just kind of making sure that the equipment's still working and keeping it warm and all of that stuff. I just the idea that kind of Apollo fire is down there in a room. It's in a bomb shelter where where it belongs. It's in a bomb shelter. It's under a mountain. It's not gone, but it's sure not easy to find. But it's there when its time is going to come. I just absolutely love that idea. Just love it. And I have a very high hope that we'll be able to do more of these in the future. These in-depth history things, if we get a chance to. I'm not saying we will. A lot's going to depend on how well this does. But if we do, I really like this idea of doing 4 hours on one topic, and not a four 1 hour podcasts. If we get a chance to do another one, and if I get to decide what it is, and if they agree with the selection, I think what I would do next is I would do a 4-part battle of Leyte Gulf, because Leyte Gulf was actually 4 different battles over the course of a day or two, and everybody knows about the carrier war in the Pacific, and people know about the submarine war in the Pacific, but nobody talks about the surface engagement war. And needless to say, Taffy 3 is a big story. That was the third of the 4 battles. The second one was called the Battle of Surigao Strait, where Japanese sent some obsolete battleships right down the throat of the American battle line and blew them out of the water, but it was just incredibly dramatic and cool. The Johnston. The Johnston and the Sammy B. and the Hogue as well. And I just want to have a chance to tell those stories. Yeah, Last of the Tin Can Sailors, I read it. It's what got me hooked on the whole thing. And then once I read Last of the Tin Can Sailors, I read everything else. I read everything else he wrote. I read everything else. Actually, Steve Green started me on it with the Fleet at Flood Tide, but we've talked about this before. I don't really want to talk about that right now. But that's what I would like to do in the future. But the thing about this Apollo thing that I'm most hole in the USS Hole in the Gambier Bay. The thing I'm most proud about, and the thing I think is going to make this what we saw thing actually do some business, is that because I knew the program so well, I didn't have to tell the stories of the missions the way that you would tell the stories of the missions if you didn't know the missions. That's kind of a hard thing to explain, really. But let's say you're a 30-year-old or 40-year-old producer, and I give you an assignment to do a special on the Apollo 11 moon landing. Well, you'll be able to do all the research, and you'll find out, well, Apollo 9 did this and Apollo 10 did that and stuff. But we don't talk much about that. At least that's not where the heart of the show is. I love the human interest stories. I love the fact that there was an actual mutiny on Apollo 7, and I don't mean like a trivial kind of ha-ha mutiny. Wally Schirra was experiencing incredible ear pain. First of all, they were up there for like 11 days, smelled like a sewer. But they just stopped doing things. Somebody wanted him to turn on the TV camera, and he says, "I'm the commander of this mission. I'm not turning it on until I think it's safe," and so on. So finally, they're getting ready to re-enter the atmosphere, and they tell him to put on their helmets, and Schirra says, "We're not wearing our helmets for re-entry." And Deke Slayton is like, Capcom is like, what? And Deke comes over, and he basically, on an open mic, is saying, "What do you mean you're not going to wear your helmets?" And Schirra says, "No, they don't have a visor. They're those Apollo bubble helmets. First helmets since maybe in the entire space program of all nations that didn't have a visor." And Schirra was worried that if he put that thing on during reentry, as the pressure increased, his eardrums would rupture. So he flat out refused to do it. And Slayton said, "Look, Wally, if you do this, you're going to have to answer for it." But he did it. And that ended up, it was Schirra's last flight. But Isley and Cunningham, who flew with him, never flew again. Because they were part of a crew that basically mutinied against, ground control. It wasn't Wally Schirra's finest moment. Wally Schirra's finest moment, I'm not going to go into all of these, obviously, but just give you a back idea of the kind of things that we talk about. When I mentioned this flight of Apollo 7, I said that wasn't Schirra's finest moment. And then I talk about what I think his finest moment was, which I mentioned in part 2 in some detail. Let's just give you a close idea of the kind of thing that we get to do on this show, on the What We Saw show. So we launch Ham, the steely-eyed astrochimp, and on a suborbital flight in a Mercury capsule on a redstone, and I forget the exact chronology. If Shepard had taken that flight, he would have been the first man in space. But since they sent the chimp, Yuri Gagarin went up, did a full orbit, a much tougher mission than anything that we were doing on the first of the first 2 Gemini flights. But Shepard would have been the first man in space, and then Gagarin flies just a couple weeks before Shepard. So Gagarin becomes the first man in space. Shepard becomes the first American in space. That's Freedom 7, the first Mercury flight. Liberty Bell 7, the second flight, suborbital flight on a Redstone rocket. Gus Grissom is the commander of Liberty Bell 7. They go up, they come down, into the water, kersplash. The capsule's righting itself. They're waiting for the helicopter. The explosive bolts on the hatch fire. The capsule begins to fill with water. Grissom escapes as the thing's going down. The helicopter puts a hook on it, and by the way, DFR, our friend DFRSS says the first human-made thing in space was 1942 German V-2 missile. In 1946, we put a camera on the top of a missile, and we got our first picture of outer space. By the way, again, these are the kind of things that I just packed the show full of. Anybody want to guess how many V-2s they made during the war? If you'd asked me, I would have said maybe 150, something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood. They made 5,200 of them, and 2,500 people were killed, which means no fooling now. You had to fire 2 V-2 rockets to kill 1 Englishman. So that's pretty amazing. Anyway, so back to this Schirra thing. So, sorry, Julius. So they try to save the capsule. The thing's filling full of water. This capsule's got all kinds of experimental data that they need. They really need that capsule back. But it's going under, and so the helicopter pilot decides rather than the capsule going to the bottom with the cable and the helicopter and Grissom, he releases the cable, and down she goes. Grissom is rescued, he nearly drowns. Now, if you've seen that scene in The Right Stuff, and I have, needless to say, several times, they don't actually show Gus blowing the bolts. They purposely leave it ambiguous, but the very last thing they say is that, first of all, Fred Ward is playing Gus like almost hysterical, trying to convince people that it was a mechanical failure, not just him screwing the pooch. So the very last thing they say in The Right Stuff is, well, what do you think? And these technical guys are saying, so they say something like, we've flown explosive bolts on hundreds of pieces of software for thousands and thousands of hours of flight time, and we've never, ever had a problem with them before. That's where they left it. But it was clear to me watching the show, and clear, I think, to anybody watching the show, that Gus had panicked and blown the hatch. They show him struggling in panic, or damn near panic, with his helmet, and then somehow the bolts fire, and they don't actually come out and say it, but they kind of come out and say it. So here's where Wally Schirra's greatest moment was. Schirra and Grissom were great friends. They were neighbors, actually, for most of the time they spent together in NASA. And after this talk about Grissom basically panicking and blowing the explosive bolts, the actual astronauts, all the Mercury 7 astronauts, all came out real hard in defense of Gus. And again, I'm going off of the Right Stuff movie, and I'm going, well, here's one of the little stories that's in the What We Saw segment. So 3 or 4 flights after Grissom, Wally Schirra flies Sigma 7 orbital flight on an Atlas. And he's so incensed at what the press is saying about Gus that when they get his capsule on the deck of the recovery ship, he's brought up separately by helicopter. The helicopter saves his capsule, puts it on the deck. He's so upset about this that Wally Schirra goes back to his capsule on the deck of the recovery ship, closes the door, locks it, and then fires the explosive bolts on the hatch. And when you do that, when you're inside the hatch and you pull whatever lever or thing you need to do to fire the explosive bolts, there's a kick. And since all of these guys had trained for this, it left a big bruise on your wrist. So and a big red mark, which turned into a big bruise. So Schirra is so pissed off about all of this stuff that he lands on the deck. He's still wet, basically. And he walks over to Sigma 7 while everybody's still congratulating him and cheering and stuff. Pulls himself back into the capsule, closes the hatch, fires the explosive bolts, comes out, it's got this big red mark on his wrist from doing that, and Grissom did not have that mark. Everybody else who had ever done it in training got it, and Schirra knew that. And when Grissom came out of the capsule without that, that was pretty good evidence. So then they found out that the one of the things that was attached to it wasn't like obviously the thing that held on the parachute, but one of the exterior attachments was held on by one latch, and they think that this lanyard somehow activated the lever. It's not like 1,000,000 to 1 explanation, and I was very, very happy to be able to. Well, first of all, change my own mind about what happened there, but also very, very happy to be able to do my small bit on clearing Gus Grissom, who I became much fonder of in the writing of this thing. About the date, yeah. So there are 4 videos and podcasts. By the way, the trailer was in the top 200 on iTunes, and it's not even a show; it's just a trailer. Where was it? I'll just give you one more. I don't want to talk about this all night, but there's something I could use some Stratosphere Lounge advice from. So Grissom has explosive bolts on one capsule, and the presence of the explosive bolts nearly drowns him, nearly dies in the water. And then several years later, he's in a capsule that doesn't have explosive bolts, and he dies in a fire. I learned a lot about that Apollo 1 fire, and I went into a lot of detail on it. And the reason I went on to this detail is because, I'm sorry, people are asking where can you see it. I will post the links to them as they come out. And they're going to release the first one on Saturday, and then this coming Saturday, and then one every 2 or 3 days, and they release part 4, which is the actual Apollo mission and everything afterwards. That's going to get released on the actual moon landing date, which is a week from Saturday. But just to give you an idea, when I say the kind of the behind-the-scenes look at these missions, if you're telling the Apollo story and you've got an hour or a 2-hour documentary to do it, almost certainly an hour, because I've seen a bunch of them out there. You talk about the Apollo 1 fire and the tragedy and the setback and the redesign of the capsule and all that stuff. But because I had 4 hours, I had to fill the time, which is why it's not about Apollo 11 at all. It's called Apollo 11, and that's going to be what gets people to watch it. But it's not about Apollo 11. It is about the space race from rocket-assisted Chinese arrows in 200 BC to SpaceX putting 2 boosters down simultaneously on the Falcon Heavy launch. But back to Apollo 1. So I got into some detail about Apollo 1. I started reading it. I put all of this in the show. And it needs to be there, and I'll tell you why. This capsule, the Apollo command module Block 1, was a pig. The hatch had 3 separate doors that you had to seal. First one, then another, then a third one. Apollos 2 through 6 were they weren't ground tests, Eric. They were unmanned launches of the hardware. This particular capsule, the capsule that they died in, when NASA took delivery of the capsule, there was something like 630 squawks, 630 individual mechanical things that were wrong with that capsule that had to be fixed before they could fly it. I guess it was North American, delivered it after having had to fix another 168 of these things before they could even get it out the factory. Grissom got so disgusted with all of the changes that had to be made to the capsule in order to get it flight worthy. Those changes then had to be reflected in the simulator. So what he's got in the simulator is not what he's going to fly. And since this is changing virtually every day, sometimes a couple times a day, Gus Grissom goes home and goes out in back of his yard and picks a lemon off of his lemon tree and strings it through a coat hanger and hangs it on the door of the simulator. And I'd never seen that picture before. I had no idea the picture existed. The editor at Daily Wire found it, and it was fantastic. So they knew that this thing was in trouble. There's a picture of the Apollo 1 crew. They're all gathered around a command module picture because that's basically what they were going to test in orbit, command and service module. And it's your typical smiley picture of the three-man crew. And then they took a gag picture, which is recorded. I'm going to find that. It's worth it. Give me 1 second, because like I say, it's not Stratosphere Lounge without dead air. It's worth seeing. Yep, here it is. Hang on a second. So they took a picture. They basically took this. Hang on. Don't give me any grief, you miserable bastards. Behave yourself. Okay. So basically they went in to take a mission picture and they took this. Come on. It's worth it, believe me. All right, it's obviously low res. So that's what they went in to do. But what I also found was this. During that photo session, after the official picture was taken, they took this picture. You can go away. Sorry, I'll just get this going. You get the idea already, but I'll just bring it up a little bit. They took this one. And they took that picture because they were so worried about this capsule and had complained about it for so long that that Gus took the picture and he sent it with a note to the head of the hardware, actually at NASA. I forget his name, but he was the guy's in charge of hardware there. And he writes on the back something like, not that we don't trust you, Jack, but we decided to go over your head on this one. So these guys all knew they had a real problem with that capsule, which makes it 3 times that NASA has had astronauts die in suits aboard their vehicles, and all 3 times NASA knew there was a problem. They didn't do anything about it. So just to wrap up this Apollo 1 thing, then I want some advice from the gangaroos. So the picture just breaks my heart. So this is the kind of detail that I go into. So there's a fire, and you hear these guys struggling, and you can hear them struggling with the straps, and there's garbled communication, and then the last thing they hear is a scream coming over the radio. The guys up in the gantry have gas masks, but they're not firefighting gas masks. They're just simple gas masks designed to protect them against toxic fumes. There's no way they can get to the capsule. Once the capsule starts to catch fire, it blows the inner pressure hull of the capsule apart, and then just jets of flame are coming out of these two access panels. So the capsule's now burning like a Roman candle, and the guys who are thinking about rescuing him can't get close enough to it because of the heat, and they're also very concerned that since this fire is going straight up and directly above them is the solid rocket booster of the escape tower, there's serious concern that this fire is going to light that solid rocket booster, which will pull the capsule off of the Apollo stack and kill everybody in the gantry as well. So the fire finally gets under control. They get it out, and they open the hatch, and the thing is so filled with black smoke they can't see anything, but the lights are on. And Grissom is lying there at the floor of the hatch. People in ground control said that they could see on video Ed White trying to open the hatch, like getting out of his chair. Ed White's seatbelts had been burned through, and he was trying to get. They saw him working the handle. And Chaffee, who was furthest from the door, was just sitting there in his position because during an emergency, Chaffee's job was to stay where he was, to be the guy to communicate with Capcom and not make a move for the exit until they'd gotten open. So here's where it gets. This is why I think this is such a good series. You tell that story, and then you basically say, as I said in this, one of the things that that the three men complained about was that there were so many inflammable materials in the capsule. There was an enormous amount of nylon just doing nothing, hanging here, so just filled with almost cosmetic stuff. And when they got the doors open, it took them an hour to get the guys out of the capsule because the nylon in the capsule had melted and fused them into the capsule. They fused them in place. It's like that scene in Aliens, They can't get them out because they're glued to the inside of the capsule from the nylon that had melted and then cooled. Deke Slayton, who was an Apollo, was a Mercury 7 astronaut, and obviously that means he's good friends with Gus Grissom, known him for a long time, and since Deke was in charge of the entire astronaut program, he knew all of them very well. And Deke Slayton was there shortly after they opened the door, and he said, I looked down, and I couldn't tell which head belonged to which body. Now, I don't think anybody else is going to be going into the detail like that. And why am I going into that kind of detail? It's not out of some, sick kind of morbid sort of thing. The reason I go into that kind of detail is because people need to know that this is the danger that these men faced, and they knew it. This is the reason I go into this detail. They all knew. Being an astronaut was not just fun, and they, Aldrin and Armstrong figured they had a 50-50 chance of coming back from that mission before they flew it. So I went into a lot of detail on how those guys died. And I did it because people need to know the risks they were taking. And certainly that crew knew the risks they were taking, or else they wouldn't have taken that picture of them all praying. Challenger, 7 people killed, burn through on the solid rocket booster. A number of burn throughs had happened on previous missions. But nothing had exploded last time, so probably won't explode this time. Columbia in 2002, or 3, I think. 3. Multiple launches had foam coming off of the external tank, which was using a much weaker glue, but was an environmentally friendly glue, so that's the main thing. So they've had foam hitting the orbiter before and hadn't caused any problems before, so it's probably not going to cause any problems now. This kind of thing with flying with known defects is I think it's unforgivable. I mean, I really do find it unforgivable. I don't know how many flights I've actually taken, but I do know I've got just under 1,000 hours. I've got 983 hours or something. And I've had 3 engine failures during that time and a couple of other emergencies and stuff. But there's only one flight out of those thousands of flights that I took where I was really scared. And I was scared the entire time because it was the one time I took off with a known defect because the pressure on me having to have that airplane at an airport was so high that I felt like I couldn't. There was no alternative to it but to put it on a truck and send it there. I just couldn't do it. I was flying a velocity, and this thing I had to pull that airplane off the runway 5 times. And we were in Gillespie, and the landing gear crunched again. So I let it go into a repair shop there. I was afraid of this airplane by this point. And I didn't want to make this last flight at all. And as they're wheeling the plane out to me, the battery, big old car battery, falls out of the nose wheel, just hanging there by the cables, by the landing, by the nose wheel doors, which close in flight. Now, if that battery had come out in flight, it's not a question of me losing electrical power. If that had happened, I'd just glide the thing in, no big deal. But since that battery was so heavy and so far forward, if that battery had departed the airplane while I was flying it, I would have been so far out of CG. I would have been so tail heavy. Velocity XLRG. I would have been so tail heavy that there would have been no place to. The plane would not have been recoverable. That would have been it. And I saw this, and I just, that I've made several decisions that I've regretted in aviation, but I never ever was scared up there except for this flight, and I was scared every second of that flight. I remember calling a friend of mine who had flown with me in this airplane a bunch and talked about this. And oh, by the way, I'm on the takeoff roll. We're 3 or 4 seconds into full power, and then bang! Some kind of thing from the engine. So I immediately cut the power, abort the takeoff, and pull over to the side. And some kind of a backfire. Ran the engine for like 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that. And I just decided to do it because I had been, my friend's father had bought it and bought it to let me fly it everywhere, and it had to be sold, and I just did it. So after the thing has the kind of backfire on the takeoff roll, I'm getting ready to go back and try again for the takeoff, and before I did that, I called my friend, and I said, can you, if I have any trouble here, could you watch out, could you take care of my cats for me? And what I was really doing, I realized after the fact, was I was looking for somebody to tell me not to fly the plane. I was looking for somebody to tell me, Bill, do not fly that airplane. But I didn't get that. Where's the audio? You guys getting audio? Audio? I'm not seeing any audio. Let me just check. Yeah, it's there. I'm not getting any levels, though. I should have rebooted this computer. So anyway, yeah, that was the only time I've ever been scared. And I was so scared that I didn't illegally enter airspace twice, but I missed 2 calls. I missed 2 air traffic control calls to me. None of them were dangerous or anything, but you should never have to call a pilot twice, and that happened to me twice. Ask you a question, give you instructions, you don't read it back, and then they ask you again, and it was a nightmare. And when I landed, I said, I'm never flying this thing again, but I should not have made that flight. But I did. And, um, and since I survived it, I learned, I learned a big lesson from that. So, you know, God in His mercy, they say that when you start flying, God gives you a gigantic bag of luck, and every time you fly an airplane, you take some of that luck out of the bag and put it into a bag called experience, and you hope that the bag called experience is big enough so that when you run out of luck, uh, you're not necessarily gonna buy the farm. Another little detail of that I got to throw in the Apollo thing. Buy the farm. What happened to the guy? Oh, he bought the farm. It means he crashed, and the term comes from the fact that a lot of this early flying was done in barnstorming days. Out in a field just outside of a small town, and a guy would fly low over the town, trailing a banner, and he'd land out on a field someplace, and he'd give rides for like $1 or $5 or whatever the case. And so over time, there were enough of these crashes where the guy basically crashed in a cornfield, ruined the guy's crops. So after he was gone, the estate did the right thing, and they bought the farm. They ruined the farm, they burned it to the ground, so then they bought the farm. Just bought it. You bought the farm. And it's a much better way of speaking than, oh, what happened to Jim? Oh, he died in a fire explosion. You can't function like that. It's not lack of it's not lack of emotion. It's the exact opposite of that. It is the mental discipline to keep emotion out of issues where emotion will hurt you. And one of these things I said somewhere in this Apollo 11 thing was I basically said emotion will kill you. Having an emotional reaction at that time, at an emergency time like that, will almost certainly kill you. During each one of the 4 hours, I keep going back to Apollo 11. So I spend the first 20 or 30 minutes on it with the landing. And then I go back to them on the moon in part 2. I go back to them getting ready to walk on the moon in part 3. And then part 4 is the actual moonwalk and all the rest of it. But I don't even remember if it survived the cut. But the Apollo one, and I'm not going to say any more words about the Velocity XLRG. It was actually constructed at the factory, and we had a good inspection of it. But they kept adding weight to that airplane, more and more and more weight, and they didn't redesign the nose gear. Things snapped like a pretzel. It snapped from. It didn't bend. It just snapped. This steel tube, which was an indication that it had been welded incorrectly. But that's experimental aviation, and that's why we all agree to this restriction. We all know that we're buying an airplane that has been built by a guy, and we just got one that just had some serious problems. And cosmetically, it was absolutely beautiful, and that's probably the danger because it just looked so good. But I found out during one of the annuals that the cable, there's a cable that retracts the mains, and it goes over pulleys, and I forget the number. But let's just say for the sake of the argument that it's supposed to pull 60 pounds of force to get the gear up. And this cable was off the pulley and was kind of rubbing against the mount of the pulley. And he did a test on it, and he said it was pulling almost 200 pounds of force, and it was still cranking the gear up. Anyway, enough about that. I don't want to give the whole show away, but does anybody know the backstory on the steely-eyed missile man term? Don't screw the pooch. I don't remember if they explained that in the right stuff. I don't really remember if it was in the movie. I'll just give you this too. Then I'll ask this big question I've been asking, and then I'll answer some questions. So the term "screw the pooch" is to make a mistake, and usually it means a bad mistake, but usually you would apply it to one that you could survive. And so the story goes like this, basically. So listen, Gus, don't screw the pooch, and what that means is, don't arrange to meet your girlfriend. Park 2 miles away with the lights off. Make your way very silently through the weeds. Carefully pick the lock on the door. Gently walk up each one of those stairs. Glide past the bedroom where Dad is sleeping with the shotgun, and then go into the wrong room and screw the pooch. Anyway, it was just a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. So here's what I'd like to do, just for another 10 or 15 minutes, that interaction with the live crowd, and then I'll take questions from both Facebook and the website. So here's what I'm going to do. I was going to do a firewall. I was going to write it tomorrow, and it was going to be about the women's soccer team. And basically, I was going to say, all right, you can say you don't want to go to the White House. All right, that's fine. And you can use the profanity. That's something else, too. That's your personal politics. There's no class, but there you go. Fine, whatever. But when I saw these women, when one of these women held up a flag, and then, what's her name? Somebody told me, I didn't even remember it. You know who I'm talking about. Pushes it out of the way, and another girl pushes it out of the way, pushes it to the ground, and then they stand on it. And then she says, I'm never going to sing the national anthem. I might take a knee, and talks about how screwed up this country is. That wasn't the Berkeley Code Pink soccer team. That was the U.S. soccer team. They represent the entire country. And what I was going to do in this firewall was, I was going to say, let me see if I can give you some idea of how offensive that was to the people of this country. Megan Rapinoe, yeah. And I would have addressed it right to her. So, Megan, this is just for you, give you some rough idea of what this feels like. You're celebrating the fact that you're the best soccer team in the world. You're not. You're not in the best 100 soccer teams in the world. You're not in the best 10,000 soccer teams in the world. You beat a bunch of girls to get this trophy. That's what you did. And if you're complaining about not getting paid as much as men, then maybe it has something to do with the fact that when you were preparing for a match game against Russia, you played a bunch of 15-year-old boys at a soccer academy in Birmingham, Alabama, and they beat you 5-2. And all the people say, "Oh, that was just training. That was just training. It didn't really count." I've seen enough of Megan to know that she's not going to just sit there and get beaten 5-2 by people that she could easily beat. I don't believe it. And furthermore, even if it's true, what does that tell you? That the women's national team, in order to prepare for a game against a ranked rival, decides to scrimmage against 15-year-old boys. If the Patriots are warming up for an exhibition game someplace, they're going to find a team to play against, but they're not going to play against the Coral Gables High School junior varsity football team. They're just not. And so, and I just was so enraged by this, just so enraged by it. And I was going to pull out all these statistics. I was going to pull out the stuff I pulled out during that firewall on the transsexual athlete, how at a state meet a year or two ago, I don't remember, it was high school. I think it was a high school track and field event. And I took a look at the times on the 10 fastest males in high school, and all 10 of those males in high school in a regional track event ran faster than the fastest woman who's ever run. And I did this because I've had enough of it. I've just had enough of it. I'm just goddamn sick of it. I am so sick of this. And Hillary Clinton, and saying you won like girls. It's like, I've had enough of it. Billie Jean King looks almost certainly like Bobby Riggs threw that match. If he didn't throw it, he played like he threw it. And then I went and did a little more research, and I found out that Jimmy Connors, 40 years old, played Marina Navratilova in her absolute prime and just destroyed her. That a number of times men have played against women in tennis, and they've started with every single set would be 30 love. That's the advantage they have on every set, just beating them all the time. I think Riggs threw the match. But my point is this. Look, I don't go around doing this just to be nasty. But if this is how you want to treat me, then this is how I'm going to treat you. You can't beat 15-year-old boys. So I wouldn't be so full of yourself if I were you. And if you want to make the same kind of money as men, then maybe you should think about the fact that if you were playing against men, your women's world champion soccer team would not make the top 500. So, and that was going to be it. And I was so wound up for it and so juiced for it, ready to do it, all of that. And I knew it was going to collect a lot of grief. And I was ready for that too. And then this afternoon I thought, you've got this big Apollo 11 thing coming up. And you wrote the thing to be 100% apolitical. There's no politics in this at all. I did it for history, did it for the guys, did it for Neil Armstrong. And you don't need to taint that with this feces storm that's going to come, which I was more than willing to deal with personally, but I just realized it's not fair, not after all the work that put into it. But I really, really wanted to do it. So here's the question that I've been pushing off for an hour now. Instead of writing one tomorrow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend tomorrow and Monday doing some more research. And what I'm going to do research on is I am going to do a firewall that may or may not officially accompany this, but I am going to do a firewall on them, and I'm going to call it the Moon Landing Hoax. It's the Moon Landing Hoax. And I'm going to tear it apart. I'm going to just tear it apart. And I've got so much ammunition that it's just shocking. I'm going to do one more thing here, if you don't mind, if you just take another little bit of dead air, because I love being able to, kind of experiment on this show. The whole show's a giant experiment, obviously. Give me 1 second. I'm going to rip a YouTube thing here, and I want to show you guys something, because I had somewhat of an idea what's going on, but I had no idea really it was quite this strong. Hang on a second. Yeah, that'll do it. Give me 1 second, and I will just run this thing through our little thing to download it, and I will show it to you. It's worth the wait. Here we go. Almost there. Okay, so what I'm about to show you is going to be Exhibit A on, I said download, don't play. Hang on. This is going to be Exhibit A in terms of my defense of the moon landing. Here it comes. So what I'm going to show you, turns out Mythbusters did this as well, but I don't want to take their stuff. Mythbusters has been terrific about going after the people that called the moon landing a hoax, but that's been 7, 8, 10 years ago, and I want to do my own take on it, needless to say. So here's something I want to show you because it's kind of mind-boggling. My number one line of evidence is going to be this. If you look at the video, the film footage that came back from the landing, shot from the LEM, when Buzz says we're kicking up some dust, the animation that they had for us at home showed a big billowing cloud of dust. The landing in 2001: A Space Odyssey, because Kubrick faked the actual moon landing. Was it the Ares or the Orion, I guess, lands, and just as it touches down, there's a big cloud of dust. And then I took a look at the landing scene from the Earth to the Moon, and as they come down and land, there's a big cloud of dust. But if you look at the actual footage coming out of the window that they were shooting on the way down, when Buzz says we're kicking up some dust, what he's doing is and anybody can see it. The dust is streaming out from underneath the LEM, and it looks exactly like you took a high-pressure water hose and aimed it right down at the concrete. It just blasts out just like that, and there's no dust cloud. It's just this dust just hauling ass out of there. It's exactly like water. And if you look at virtually any single frame of video, you look at any single frame of video on any one of the 6 missions, you will see that as these astronauts move, you'll see the dust coming off of their boots, and the dust goes in little sprays like this. And the reason that it does that is because it's in a vacuum. In an atmosphere, dust particles are so fine that once you move them, once you give them some actual motion, they stay suspended among the air molecules, but there is no air on the moon. So on the moon, dust behaves like water. And it's most clear on the rover shots. The rover is pitching up these gigantic plumes of dust, which are behaving exactly like water. So, yes, Martin Archer says it's a vacuum, and I should add in 1/6 gravity. Now, there's no way everybody's in agreement that there was nothing like the computer graphics necessary to do this. How are you going to simulate the dust? There's no way to simulate the dust. This is the thing people don't understand, and I hit this pretty hard in the Apollo 11 thing. It is in 1969. It is possible to land on the moon, but making version 1 of Photoshop is utterly beyond our ability and would be for another 15, 20, 30 years. So, how do you explain this? And the only way you can explain it is to say that the set was in a vacuum. Which brings me to this little thingy-doody that I just downloaded, which I will now find at great expense here. So, what I'm going to show you is something very simple. I'm going to show you what happens when you take a railroad oil tanker and you reduce the pressure inside the tanker so that it's not a complete vacuum. It doesn't have to be anything close to a vacuum. But just for the sake of it, I want you to imagine what's actually happening. And that is, this is a heavy-duty railroad car, and it is connected to hoses in such a way that on the other end of the hose is a vacuum as close as they can get it. And when they open that valve, all of the air inside of the car is going to be sucked out of the car. Okay? That's what happens. The air that's inside the tank is going to be removed from the tank, and that's all that happens. No pyrotechnics, nothing else. So that's what you're going to see. Take a look at this.
760. Gewonnen haben, Herr, kommt der hin.
So, what did we just see? What we just saw, can you run again? What we're seeing is the power of air. This is how much air weighs. This is
760.
what we walk through all the time. We don't feel it because we're buoyed up in a sea of air. But if you take the air away and make a vacuum on the surface, this is what the atmosphere does when there's no air inside that tank to compensate for the outside of the tank. Which means that if you were to look at the largest vacuum chamber in the world, I think I might have shown this before. This is the largest structure that can produce a vacuum on planet Earth. Believe it or not, it's owned by NASA. Here it is. Hopefully. 1 second. Don't be a nasty little. Okay, here it comes. I think I might have shown this before. This is the world's largest vacuum chamber. It's called the Space Power Facility. That is the largest structure that scientists could build and engineers could build that would withstand the pressure of the atmosphere if you had to make a vacuum on the surface. This thing looks thick enough to contain a nuclear blast. I would not be surprised if it was thick enough to contain a nuclear blast. So why is this thing so strong? Well, it's so strong because it has to be that strong to prevent the weight of the atmosphere that crushed that oil tanker that you just saw, right? This structure with these concrete walls and the steel interior has to be this robust because if it's not, it's going to crush itself when you take the air out of it, just the way the oil tanker did. And those oil tankers are not little cans of soda. Those are seriously constructed, heavy-duty items, okay? So the simple fact of it is, and I'm just going to hammer this home, and once I've got the script, I can refine it and not ramble on so much. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to make a sound stage to fake the moon landing in, and you're going to put it in a vacuum so that the dust does what it's supposed to do, then that is a much harder engineering task than flying to the moon. It's much harder. So I said I could use a little advice here in the comment section. Maybe somebody could keep track of these. I'm going to watch a bunch of these moon landing hoaxes. But I would just like to take a few moments for the people who are watching this recorded. This won't help you, but if you're watching it live, it's going to be great. I would like, if you can remember, I'd like to hear some of the arguments that the people make, not against the hoax. I know how to defeat the hoax arguments. I just want to know what all of them are. If it's possible for one kind person in the Stratosphere Lounge thing to cut and paste these things, I don't want to miss anything. But I want to be able to address every single one of these issues. For example, they say that these lines should be parallel, but they're not. Therefore, it's a fake. It's the sea rock. Yeah, that's. I'm going to close with the sea rock. Hang on. Van Allen belts. Yeah, I think that's actually probably their best argument, is the Van Allen belts. I'm going to take a look at it. There's no question. No crater under the LEM, all of this. So let me just give you a couple of responses, because this is really useful. And here's one of my favorites. The computers, I wrote this. I wanted to put it in the Apollo 11 show. There wasn't time, but I love this. If somebody could make a list of these, I'd be very grateful. We didn't have the computers to go to the moon. Let me tell you what this is like. If you're one of these people who were born after 2000, if you're a millennial, and you think we didn't go to the moon because we didn't have the computer power, let me just tell you what this feels like. I want you to imagine that it's 50 years from now, and you're sitting there watching a program about the old days back in 2020. And you're poking around, scanning the videos that are being played in your head through the neural net. And you find one that says that human sports, never happened. All of the footage, all the historical footage, Babe Ruth's home run, all of it is is a CG recreation because, of course, by that time, the computer graphics will be indistinguishable from the real world. There'll be somebody on there saying that human sports never happened. It never happened. And the reason it never happened was because it's ridiculous to think that a human being, without the aid of embedded neural circuits, is able to do the calculations necessary to run to the correct spot on the field and follow this ball, which is following a parabolic path. There's no way that a human being can do the math or do the complex mathematics necessary to lead a receiver 80 yards down the field. There's no way for them to do the math like that in their head. There's no way. It is physically impossible without these advanced neurobotchima thingies that we have in our head to sink a three-point shot from the foul line. It just can't be done. It's not possible. They did not have they didn't have the computer technology to have done this thing that you claim that they did. Like a man hits a ball with a stick and it goes 500 yards, or a guy can throw a ball, 15 meters and have it go through a hoop this big. It's absurd. It's ridiculous on its face. They couldn't do it. These guys didn't have the internal computers of any kind, let alone enough material to process these equations. That's what it feels like. Now, let me tell you the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that the amount of computing needed to go to the moon is no greater than what an outfielder needs to do in his head while he's running to catch a fly ball. You have an object in motion. Its path is being distorted by gravity. In the case of the baseball, also by the atmosphere, by drag, but in space, no. And so you can tell where that object is going to be because the path of an object is known. A baseball player is not catching a Major League Baseball player is not catching a foul ball for the first time. He's caught foul balls or fly balls before. That's why he's playing Major League Baseball. I've done it myself, and if I can catch a fly ball, anybody can. And I am doing the calculations in my head of velocity, vector, deceleration, gravity, all of this stuff. And furthermore, while I'm watching this, I am running, not looking at where I'm going, and my brain is automatically computing the precise spot on the field, which is at the most a yard wide. It's computing the exact precise spot on the field where I have to be at the time that ball is going to hit that place. That's insane. It's absolutely impossible. It just boggles the mind that people could even believe such a thing was possible. Because the reason that we could go to the moon without powerful computers is because it doesn't take powerful computers to go to the moon. The math is very simple. I don't know the number, and I'm going to probably find a way to do the research on this, but I'd be willing to bet you. In fact, I bet pretty much everything I own that the amount of calculations that a computer has to do to display one frame of 120 frame per second video game like Red Dead Redemption, the amount of calculation has to happen on one frame of that is far in excess of everything that the Apollo program ever used, just to do one frame. The math is so simple that you can do it in a head. You can do it with analog computers, as Warp Vector points out. It's very, very simple math. And you don't have to do this math 60 times a second. You have to do this math 15 times over a 10-day mission. Because the key to understanding this, how could it possibly have the precision without the computers? Well, turns out they had pretty good precision without the computers because people can do mathematics. They know what something weighs, they know how much stress it's going to be. But the point is, just like the outfielder, you are constantly making course corrections. If an outfielder was to look at a ball come off the bat, the second the guy hits the ball and it goes that far, it goes the length of the bat off the bat. If that outfielder then was able to close his eyes and run to the exact spot where he needed to be, then you would be able to say, well, it's just not possible. But that's not what happens. What's happening is, as that ball is in flight, the outfielder is constantly making course corrections as the solution narrows, and as the solution gets closer and closer and closer, he has to make smaller and smaller and smaller adjustments. The fact that an outfielder running after a fly ball is able to adjust his trajectory based on what he's seeing is exactly what happens when you go to the moon. We have a good idea where that Apollo service lunar module, service module, command module are going. We got a real good idea where they're going. We have a very good idea where we're going, but we're going to find out where they are by radar, and then we're going to check it, and then we're going to check it again. And if it turns out that they start to drift, because they do, because nobody has that kind of accuracy, then we will do a mid-course correction. And then we will see if we're off or if we're on. And if time goes on, we get a little more off, then we'll make another correction. If we have to make 15 corrections, that's what we'll do. These people assume that you need to have the computer power to put a capsule, a LEM, on a dot on the moon from launch with the doors closed and the windows, painted over. No, any idiot can get to any position using the ability to correct their course to hit a moving target. I think that's just such a great argument. But the best argument by far, is this. It's my personal favorite anyway. What's the guy who's the Apollo, Gavin, whatchamacallit? Who's the, lost his mind guy. It'll come up in a second. Yeah, Foghorn says you can do it. They make you, Owen Benjamin, thanks. Foghorn says that at the Air Force Academy, they make you do a Hohmann transfer orbit without using a calculator. You have to do the math by hand. It's tough. As Foghorn says, it sucks, but you do it in your head. Okay, got it. So here's the question I would want to ask somebody like Owen Benjamin. You've got 375,000 people working on the Apollo program. Virtually every one of those people has to be in on this. And when we say we've got people working on the space program, included in a very small sample of that group are test pilots who face death on a daily basis. They go into, at Edwards Air Force Base, at the time they picked these astronauts, you had a 25% chance of not coming back from any first flight in an airplane. So you got some pretty fearless guys here. So you've got 300,000 people in a conspiracy, and none of them talk. Why? Has anybody heard anything other than they knew if they spoke that they would be killed and their families would be killed? Has anybody ever heard anything else beside that? I haven't. Here's the problem with the 8-second delay. I'd really like to know, has anyone ever said that the reason you could get so many people onto this conspiracy and keep them on is anything other than the fact that if they talked or produced some pictures of the set, they would be killed? Anybody else heard that? Okay, so I'm going to say that there's not. So here's my argument. So you have 375,000 people who are going to be quiet because of America's competition with Russia. I want to do this debate live real bad. But if you're saying that every one of them lived in fear of being assassinated by NASA, if you're saying, because what you're saying is, Neil Armstrong lied about going to the moon because he was so terrified of what NASA would do to him and his family. This guy who faces death all the time. He's so terrified of what they threatened to do to him that he remained silent for 50 years. So what you're telling me is that NASA is willing to murder Neil Armstrong. NASA's willing to murder Neil Armstrong in order to keep this a secret, right? Right? That's basically the claim. Well, if NASA is willing to murder Neil frickin' Armstrong, then what the hell is Owen Benjamin talking about it for? Why has anybody even heard his name? If he's got the keys to this conspiracy that everybody has kept under lock and key and that Neil Armstrong would be murdered for, why on earth would an agency that's willing to kill its best and brightest allow a lunatic like this to go out and talk about all of this stuff and reveal all of these secrets? How do you possibly justify that? How? How do you justify the fact that you're saying that 375,000 people lived in mortal terror of this information, and you are now freely revealing this information, and nothing's happening to you? How's that possible? You're a nobody. You say that NASA's going to kill Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins in order to keep a secret that you're talking about day and night? Nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows who you are. They would have bumped you off. If they're ready to kill Neil Armstrong to protect the secret, what makes you think that they would not kill you? What makes you think that? Seriously, I want an answer. Can anybody give me an answer to that question? Why somebody like Owen Benjamin is allowed to tell these secrets, but Neil Armstrong would be killed if he did, or any one of the 375,000 people? Here's another little problem. Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, you can't see the landing sites from Earth orbit. You can't even see it with the Hubble telescope. It's too small. You can't see the LEM or the gear. But the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which was put into the moon, I want to say in the early part of the 2000s, was in lunar orbit taking high-resolution pictures of anywhere from a meter to a half a meter resolution. And they took pictures of all of the landing sites. And sure enough, just like the fact that they all return laser beams, that's going to require a little explanation. Sure enough, looking down from orbit, you can see the LEM, you can see where the footprints are, you can see the rover tracks on the missions that had rovers. All of it is clearly visible in these photos. Now, needless to say, you're going to tell me that these photos of the landing site are also faked. Because if you can't tell me that they're faked, then we both agree that this satellite has seen the actual hardware on the moon. Right? So, if the footage from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is faked, that means that your conspiracy of 375,000 people has to continue for 50 years. You have to have everybody in NASA living under that kind of fear for 50 years. And there are better arguments. I'm just warming up. I just kind of need to get this out of my system, kind of loosen up a little bit. So this is very helpful for me. I love rehearsing kind of on this show. So the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is making fake pictures. And the scientists that built that are unaware of this. That's okay. I'm not willing. I'm going to do this as a firewall. I know I can't convince people like that. They're mentally ill. But I can convince a lot of people that seem to think that this kind of thing is true. Another couple questions, and this is the main point of what we saw. Where do you insert the conspiracy, and where does it end? And I'm willing to admit that it continues to this day, because that at least is internally consistent. So, where did the faking begin? Let's just walk ourselves through this step, shall we? Do you believe that bottle rockets can fly? So the videos of bottle rockets on the internet are not hoaxed. Those are real. Okay. What about these larger sounding rockets? What about the V2s? Were they real? Was that part of the conspiracy too? Did they blow up parts of London to prepare for a moon landing conspiracy 30 years in the future? No? Okay, so that's true. So what about the fact that we would put a small rocket on top of a V2 rocket and put it up even higher, stage rocket? Is that possible? Okay. What about the suborbital mission where we put a chimp in a rocket and send it up and it comes right back down again? Is that possible? Because unlike the Soviets, which did all of this stuff in secret, we had millions of people watching all of this live and there. What happened on Mercury Redstone? What happened on Freedom 7? Did Alan Shepard take a capsule ride on a rocket into space, yes or no? I'm going to assume he's going to say yes. Okay, well, what about John Glenn riding an Atlas rocket into orbit? That happened? Mm-hmm. Okay. In order to go to the moon, we need to carry the weight and the fuel necessary to do that. And in order to do that, we have to build a very large rocket called the Saturn V. Now, I claim that we built 15 of them and launched 13 of those 15. Are you claiming that those rockets never left the pad? because I saw 2 of them go. And that means that I'm in on the conspiracy at age 10. Millions of people were tens of millions of people were there for the launches of Saturn V rockets. They went up 13 times, and millions of people watched every single one of them. Forget on TV, saw it with their own eyes. I saw it with my own eyes. I felt it in my chest as it went off the pad. I'm 10, 11 years old. I'm part of the conspiracy at 11 years old. Is that it? So did the Saturn V get off the ground, yes or no? And when you start to narrow this stuff down with these people, you begin to realize this is where you can really get them. Most of them will say, the little I've heard of it will say, yes, the Saturn V actually went into space, yes, and the astronauts stayed in orbit, they didn't go to the moon. Okay. So we have the command module in orbit, the lunar module in orbit, all of this stuff is in orbit, but it didn't actually go to the moon. In other words, of 100% of the energy needed for the mission, 97% of that energy is just to get that stuff into Earth orbit. And then the 3% of energy is not happening. Is that what you're saying? You're saying that it stayed in Earth orbit, and we did all of this to beat the Soviets? This is the motivation for 375,000 people being part of this lie? To beat the Soviets? Well, then, it makes kind of an interesting question, doesn't it? Because it seems to me that if we faked leaving Earth orbit, and we stayed there the whole time, and we claimed we landed on the moon, it seems to me that the radar operators in the Soviet Union might have just, chipped in a word or two about that. In other words, if we didn't fly to the moon when we said we did, then the Soviets could prove we were still in Earth orbit. And so you're saying that the Soviets are in on the conspiracy to defeat the Soviets. Is that what you're saying? Is that it? So, if this secret is so powerful and your information so precious, I have a few other questions for you. If revealing this information is going to cause the end of the world, basically, that the whole country would have fallen apart in the 60s and 70s if they found out that the moon landing was faked, and that's why we had to murder people or threaten to murder people, okay? Let's just say that you're right. So we go to the moon landing, we fake the moon landing, the Russians agree to play along with us for reasons that isn't really clear with us. But in any event, let's say you're right. So we set the thing up in a studio, and we make it into a vacuum, and we build a thing with walls that's thick, and you saw the vacuum chamber, and you saw what it did to the oil tank and all the rest of it. Okay. So we've fooled the entire world. We've managed to fool the entire world into believing this horrendous lie that we went to the moon. Then why did we go back a second time? Why would we take that risk again? If the whole thing was to prove that we beat the Russians, faking Apollo 11 is all you need. Faking Apollo 12 is just asking for more trouble. It's just asking for another chance to have pictures and stuff leak out. It's another 3 astronauts you have to swear in, another crew, all of this stuff. So why do we go back the second time? And in fact, if it turns out that this whole thing was a hoax, why would we go to the trouble of going to the moon once, winning the argument, packing it up, and going home? We faked the moon landing. They bought it. Suckers, fantastic. We win. The conspiracy wins. Why would we go back a second time? And why would we fake an explosion? And more importantly, Owen, if we're going to fake a moon landing, would you really have missed it? Do you think that the American people would have stood up in shocked outrage if they had not included a golf cart that drove 12 miles in a vacuum? That drove 12 miles, constantly transmitting live footage? Do you think that the American people would have said, hey, we've been to the moon 4 times now. How come we don't have a rover? This can't be right. So why would you do that then? Why would you, if the moon landings are fake and you're trying to protect a secret, then why would you do something that required you to drive 12 miles where the horizon is visible. Why? Why would you do that? Doesn't that completely, does that just not make it sound insane that NASA would take that risk again? Why would they do that? Why? Every single time you do something like this, there's a chance of us knocking over one of those styrofoam rocks with the C on it, right? So why go back? Why go back with a rover? Why go back with the rover 3 times? Why? And then the other question I want to know is this. If the moon landing didn't happen, what about the space shuttle? Did that happen? So basically what you're I'm out of character now. I'm out of the acting part here. Basically what they're saying is there's no way for them to deny that we've been in orbit. There's no way to deny that Alan Shepard went on a suborbital flight. There's no way to deny that Glenn went into orbit. There's no way to deny the space shuttle went into orbit. There's no way to deny the satellites that are above our head, including the International Space Station. No way to deny that. So what they're basically saying is we had the technology to go to the moon, but we only went into Earth orbit because going to the moon was impossible. And all they're left with is the Van Allen belts. That's all they're left with. So the Van Allen belts have been measured a number of times. And as it turns out, these astronauts were in spacesuits, and they were in, they were in flight suits. They were in a capsule. There was some shielding in that capsule. If there had been a solar flare during the mission, they would have been in real trouble. But that would have had to have been a solar flare that was aimed pretty much directly at the Earth. So they transit the, and if anybody can do this research for me, I would be very, very, very grateful if you could mail it to info@billwhittle.com. Here's the specific piece of information I need to know. What was the dose? I'm sure I can find it. What was the dose that the Apollo astronauts took? And how does that compare to things in the real world? In other words, was going through the Van Allen belts twice equivalent to 10 chest x-rays, 20? I don't think it was that much. But what radiation level of exposure was it? If you can give it to me in sieverts, that'd be awesome. Right? Because the guys in Chernobyl took 4 to 5 sieverts. That's a 50-50 chance of surviving 1 year. Yeah, and Martin Archer gets it. Not only Martin Archer gets it, Martin Archer gets it with Elan. None of them died of space cancer. So, all of this stuff, where does the conspiracy start? Did it start before the Mercury program, or did John Glenn go into orbit? What about Gemini? Did that happen? What about the Apollo missions? Did they happen? So we're able to put this stuff into Earth orbit, but we can't get it to the moon because that's impossible. What about Apollo 8? They went to the moon and didn't land. Did that happen? No, it didn't happen. You would think that the Soviets might want to point that out to the world. If the whole point is for us to fake the Soviets and beat the Soviets, you think the aluminum heat shields would have melted on the way back in. Well, Owen, you are very absolutely correct. An aluminum heat shield would definitely have melted on the way back in. So, as it turns out, if the Apollo 11 command module had an aluminum heat shield, then the whole thing had to be faked, because an aluminum heat shield would in fact melt, no question about it. As it turns out, though, Owen, the actual command module is in the Smithsonian Institution. You can go to Washington and see it. I'll pay the fare. And 0.18 rad, what is that? Anybody can somebody do that conversion for me into sieverts and give me an idea of what 0.18 rad was? Thank you. So here's my point, Owen. Go to the actual command module, the physical command module. It's the one that they wrenched out of the water, because they did wrench something out of the water, right? You agree with that? Or was that fake too? Was the aircraft carrier fake, the whole thing fake? Or did they actually did something come down out of space on parachutes? See, this is where you're going to really get people. Here's where you're going to get them. they are criticizing something that happened, and they have a small number of things that they say are deal breakers. But what they don't have is an alternate story that's consistent. In other words, all they're doing is sniping at the truth and reaching for these incredibly thin straws. But they will. I want to know. I want you to tell me what happened. You don't get to just sit there and deny everything and come up with magical answers for everything that I don't get to respond to. What happened? Oh, nobody really knows. Well, what do you think happened? What do you think? Tell me what you think happened. I think they went into orbit and then they faked the moon landing and then they came back down again. Okay, so we got the Soviet problem. We got the vacuum problem. We got the gravity problem. We got the why go again problem. And what do you have in order to prove that this didn't happen? We got a rock with a C on it. I'll tell you what, when I don't know this for a fact, and they say an attorney should never ask questions he doesn't know the answer to, but I'd be willing to bet a fair amount of money that if you went right this second over to, let's just pick one, Warner Brothers Studio, and you went into the props department and you looked up their rocks that they use to create the feeling of inside a set, I'd be willing to bet you a fair amount of money that if you turn all of those rocks over, the prop rocks, the foam rocks, that they don't have letters on the bottom. And they sure as hell don't have letters that look like they were scrawled with somebody's left hand, because I'm going to show hundreds of pictures of things in nature that look like numbers and letters, and these all have to be part of the conspiracy too. If you've got a face of a mountain that looks like an old man, that's part of the conspiracy. Because I'm claiming that C on that one rock is simply a natural feature, and the fact that it's so rough is an indication it's a natural feature. Your entire argument is going to be based on this, and you've got to explain. You've got to explain a 365-foot tall rocket leaving the Earth in front of millions of people 13 times against a thing that might or might not be a C on a rock. That's it? That's all you got? Oh, it's not on the original film? Okay. I know I'm not going to be able to convince them. I'm not. But what I want to do, what I badly want to do, is I want to humiliate them. I want to humiliate them. I want them to explain to me how this happened. Explain it to me. How do you explain the dust? Computer graphics? We didn't have computer graphics. Everybody knows we didn't have computer graphics. If NASA had secretly developed the kind of computer graphics that we don't even have today, photorealistic computer graphics, just barely starting to come into 50 years after the fact, if NASA had the computers to do that from scratch, that's it? That's all you got? I mean, people don't even have apples for another 15, 20 years. Turns out you don't need a computer to go to the moon. You can do it very easily on a calculator. Okay, so what's the 0.116 to 1.14 rads going through the Van Allen belt? What does that come to? In other words, what is an equivalent? Oh, these are great. I hope somebody can copy these down for me. I get the doses, those dosages. That's great. I want to know what an approximate radiation dose is. Here's the kind of information I'm looking for. The amount of radiation that they took going through the Van Allen belts. I would like somebody to tell me that's the equivalent of what a dental technician takes in 4 days. Or that's the equivalent of what a flight attendant takes in 6 months. You know what I mean? That's what I need. I need something to show how small that is. Martin Arser says it's not worth the effort. Martin, you're wrong, and I don't mean that in a nasty way. You're absolutely right that it is a futile effort to try and convince these people, like Owen and the rest of them. Utterly futile. They're mentally ill. But they have convinced millions and millions and millions of people that they're not, that they're right. And those people can be reached. Those people can be reached. Thinks the Van Allen belt will cook you like a microwave. What's your evidence for that? You have to provide evidence, Owen. I can't say that the Van Allen belts have zero radiation to counter your assertion that they would have cooked people like a microwave. So where do you get your data? Where do you get the data on the intensity of the Van Allen belts? Beaumonde, it's great information. I don't have the mathematical brain to do it. Could you tell me what approximately that rate is? So I want to embarrass them. I want to embarrass them, and I want to put together a video, and I'm going to have to restrain my anger on the video, but I will keep my snark. I'm going to do it like the atomic bombs video. I'm going to find a way to retain my my fury, and just keep some simple questions. Just simple questions. It's like, there's that picture that they use for the 9/11. There's a picture somebody used for the 9/11 conspiracy, and it's a picture of a 767. It's the 767. I've seen the Mitchell and Webb thing a million times. It's great. And it's a 767. It's blown up enormously. It's a frame, and then underneath the aircraft, you can see what looks like an elongated tube or something, elongated metal tube. And they're pointing out the dimensions of the tube, and that this tube, given the length of the wings, would be about 7 or 8 feet long, 4.5 feet wide. It's approximately the size of an ALQ targeting pod. Okay, blah, 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 blah. My answer to that would be, I would like to see the video frames. I'd like to see 5 frames before this frame, and I'd like to see 5 frames after. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to watch that Owen Benjamin thing talking about the hoax. Oh, this is going to be exciting. It's an hour. What a shame. Anyway. I'm just going to scroll through here. Okay. So it's a guy out in the woods talking. Now, I can go out in the woods and say that Owen Benjamin is being paid $700 million by the oil companies to make this video. In fact, I have proof. I've talked to people who wrote the check. I've talked to the people that wrote the check. I've got a guy that admitted that this entire thing that he's doing, trying to make people think that the moon landing is a hoax, is part of a greater conspiracy. The moon landing did happen, of course, but the actual conspiracy is to destabilize the American people so much that they think it didn't. And that's the conspiracy that he's part of, and that's why he's getting paid. And I've got evidence, I've got the check, I got the guys who wrote the check, I got all this other stuff, got all of it. Just back at home, all of it, all the stuff you need. It's right there. Let's just see what I might have missed here. Yes, now here's... oh, he has some choice words for me? Fantastic. Great. Looking forward to it. For the motive to simply, not to convince him, but to convince other people. Just to convince other people. And take every one of the arguments and deal with them. And if it's correctly set up with search engines and stuff, I want to have millions of views for it. People, look, I'll tell you what's useful about this. What did he say, Chandran? Just give. I don't need a direct quote. I just like to get the short form. Unlike him, I'm going to show video evidence because pictures and video especially convinces people in a way that sitting out in the woods doesn't. I'm going to show that oil tanker collapsing. And it's not just that one. There's a bunch of them, all of them. And then I'm just going to say, I hope he's watching this one. I hope he gets a chance to watch this one. You know, everybody who's talking about you, Owen, if you happen to be watching this, everybody says the same thing. Everybody says it's a tragedy, what's happening. Everybody's saying that you're a funny guy and that you're a smart guy and that something happened to drive you over the edge. And everybody's sad about it. I'm sad about it too, and I've never heard a word of your stuff before. But everybody here is like, it's such a shame. I really, really like listening to him. So, you know, if somebody were to give me the kind of evidence that I have for the moon landing, if they were to give me that kind of evidence to tell me that communism was actually a net good for society, I'd become a communist. I can't be clear enough. Oh, okay. Well, morons are morons. That's what I am, I guess. 0.0018 sievert, that's what they took. The guys at Chernobyl took 4.5, and half of them died. Wow. Anyway, hold on. The high end of the radiation doses, Lord Bios. I hope somebody could copy and paste these for me. The high end of the radiation dose received by the Apollo astronaut was slightly more than what the average person is exposed to on a daily basis. 1.14 rads equals 11.4 millisieverts. Average dose is... Can that be right? I'm sure it is. Okay. Now, see, part of winning arguments is to concede parts that are true. If Owen Benjamin were claiming, let me rephrase that, if I were claiming that the Apollo 11 capsules went through the Jovian radiation belts, then you'd have a real problem. What is it? You know, I mean, I know what it is. Yeah, obviously we're not going to get a whole lot of questions in, but that's okay. Sometimes I just need to stretch my legs. I know what it is. It's clinical paranoia for one thing. That's just a mental disease. That's all there is to it. And it's the sense of being in on a secret, which is special. It's a sense of having the courage to face the murder machine. That makes you feel like a hero. Although sitting out in the woods like that, revealing these secrets that NASA was ready to kill 300,000 people for, seems like a fairly easy shot to me. Oh, for God's sakes, Lord Bias, please cut and paste these things for me. Please cut and paste them and send them to info@billwhittle.com. The low end of what the Apollo astronauts took is equivalent to the yearly use of a cathode ray monitor. In other words, Yeah, the old monitors, the big ones. That gives you about as much dose in a year as what they took going through the thing. Okay. Thank you. That's exactly what I need. But I think ultimately what drives most of it is this desire that people have to make the world more interesting than it is. It's not more interesting than it is. Going to the moon is a lot more interesting than not going to the moon. Eric's right about the narcissism. I know, I'm in on it. You're just sheeple. You're just morons and idiots. You've all been brainwashed. But I, through my superior intellect, you see, I'm able to rise above this mountain of evidence and stand here holding two twigs, which can be blown over by a 4-year-old, and claim that I'm right and you're wrong because Owen. That's the evidence because. So a lot of it is that, and a lot of it is this desire to have the world be more interesting. It's the Loch Ness Monster thing. It's the UFOs thing. It's all the same thing. It's 9/11. All of it. You want there to be, and by the way, this is what I think is actually interesting. And nothing I've said about this before is really new, but this I have not heard before. I maintain that this kind of thinking, well, first of all, paranoia is a brain dysfunction. It's been there forever. But I maintain that this is what happens when you have a society that has received so much entertainment in the form of movies. Because every single thriller is about a reversal. Every single thriller is about something appearing to happen when something actually does happen underneath. 6 Days of the Condor, and all of it. It's all about the fact that we have been raised to believe that the twist is going to come because writers put twists into stories because true stories are not interesting enough. That's why, and I write stories, so I know what twists are for, and I know why reversals are there, and I know where they go, and I know when they need to be done, and all the rest of it. So, yes, if you do nothing but grow up on a diet of movies, I'm not talking about conspiracy documentaries at all. I'm just talking about things like, I'm talking about like Jack Treacher and Born Identity, all of it. It's all of it. Hey, can somebody tell me? Can somebody get me the relative dose? Somebody mentioned nuclear subs. Can somebody tell me what the relative dose is for just a normal 2-3 month cruise in a 688 boat? How much radiation they take? I'll bet it's less than you get if you worked in Grand Central Station. In fact, I hate to put so much burden on people, but I have heard that the granite in Grand Central Station is so naturally radioactive that it is at 3 or 4 times the permissible levels for a nuclear power plant control room. I'd like to know if that's true. So we expect the twist, and the bigger the story, the bigger the twist. This is the biggest story of all time. Where's the twist? Well, there is no twist. This is reality. And again, the thing about having watched it was, here's an example I used. Did I say this earlier in the show? I don't think I did. If I told you that the Wright brothers went to Kitty Hawk in 1903 and built an F-22 Raptor, you would say that's impossible. And you would be absolutely correct. But they didn't build an F-22 Raptor. They built a contraption with a 12-horsepower homemade engine covered with cloth, made out of wood, that flew about, I don't know, what was the longest flight was 400 feet, something like that. Got 10 feet off the ground. No retractable landing gear, no electronics, no radio, nothing. So, that's the Wright Flyer. But if I showed you the Wright Flyer next to a Sopwith Camel, let's say, from World War I, would that be an unimaginable difference over 10 years? You still got cloth wings, still got a wood structure, got a better engine, got better controls. You carry enough weight now because of the more powerful engine to carry the weight of a machine gun. Is that too much of a leap for you from the Wright Flyer to a Sopwith Camel? Okay. What about the difference between a Sopwith Camel and a Hawker Hurricane? Hawker Hurricane is an all-wood monoplane. It was built before World War II. Did the heavy lifting of the Battle of Britain. It could take a lot of damage because it was made out of wood. The Hawker Hurricane is basically a propeller-driven aircraft, and instead of 2 wings made out of fabric, it's got 1 wing, but it's all made out of wood. Does that seem impossible over 10 or 20 years of intense research? Because it doesn't seem impossible to me. Now, if I have a Hawker Hurricane on the ground and I put it next to a P-51, what I get are 2 single low-wing monoplanes. One of them's made out of aluminum and steel. The other one's made out of wood, but they look exactly the same. And aside from this difference in construction, they perform more or less the same. Is that an unbridgeable gap between the Hawker Hurricane and the P-51? What about when some breakthrough happens and you get a jet engine? Did we proceed directly to the F-22? Or is the F-86 essentially a P-51 with a jet engine in it? Same kind of control systems. Pilots were the same from World War II. Machine guns, retractable gear was already on the Hawker Hurricane, was on the P-51. So what is it magical about the F-86? Nothing? Well then, if there's nothing magical about the F-86, what's magical about the F-4? The F-4 Phantom is got 2 engines, but it's a jet, and it's got basically the same kind of hydraulic controls, and it goes faster than the F-86, but it's got 2 engines, bigger engines, and it's built 15 years later, 10 years later. Is that unbridgeable? No. Okay, so if the F-4 is unbridgeable, is not unbridgeable, then what about with the computer revolution coming along, and you have the idea of this fly-by-wire? Instead of having mechanical linkage to the controls, by the time we get into the mid-70s, we have enough computing power to have a computer operate the controls. Otherwise, the jet is the same. It's an aluminum and steel structure with a jet engine in the middle and a canopy up front. The only difference is the F-16 is using a computer to move the control surfaces based on the pilot input, rather than just having hydraulic or direct linkage. Is that too much to believe? No? Okay. Well, what about the F-117? Had no performance, had no guns, could drop a bomb, but you look at the F-117, it's a flying miracle. It's all facets. It's first-generation stealth. But given the fact that the F-16 can fly by wire, meaning the computer can keep that airplane stable, if we have that technology on the F-16, then is it an enormous leap to assume that that computer over a course of a few years could become sophisticated enough to make a more unstable airplane still fly more or less straight and level? Because all the F-117 is just a bunch of flat planes that are designed to deflect or absorb radiation from radars. Is that a leap? No? Okay. Well, we have the F-15. I probably should reverse order on these things, between the 15 and the F-117. The F-15 comes along, and we've got these incredibly powerful radars. They're over-the-horizon radars. They're basically just an incremental improvement on the radars on board the F-4, and that was just an improvement on board the radars on board the, I don't know if the F-86 had a radar. I suspect it probably did, but I don't know if it did. I know the P-51 didn't. So the F-15 comes along, and now you've got a powerful radar that's able to scan in multiple directions, track targets over the horizon, and so on. We're all right with that. Then here comes the F-17 story. We're all right with that. Okay. And then we end up with something like the F-18, which has extremely high performance loads due to the fact it's got very, very powerful engines. And then finally, if you're standing there with an F-18 on the deck, and somebody showed you an F-22, would you say that's impossible? No, you wouldn't, because you didn't start with the F-22. And we didn't start with the moon landing. And it's just that simple. Just that simple. I have seen the video of a Israeli pilot landing an F-15 with 1 wing. John Boyd made sure that the F-15 had so much wing that could outturn anything in the sky. Turns out it had enough wing area. And most of the wing a lot of the wing on the F-15 is actually over the back of the fuselage. You could knock a whole wing off the F-15 and had the kind of total lift available and enough control surface authority to land with one wing. The P-51 had radar? Surely no. Commonly, in World War II, the P-61, yeah, is that the Black Widow? That's the night fighter. Anyway, yeah, so now I'm all limbered up. Why don't we take a couple questions just for the sake of saying we did it. But I just needed to get, not so much I needed to get out of my system, I just needed to, just kind of limber up a little bit, get myself kind of ready for this thing, get into this mode. So I think it's a compelling case that we went to the moon. I was actually thinking what it would take to convince somebody like Owen. And I realized it would take flying him to the moon. And even then, I'm not sure it would do it. Even then, I suspect if you flew him to the moon, he'd probably maintain that he'd been drugged and that the whole thing was an illusion. Is he a flat Earth person as well? Because I have a few questions about, I'm not going to do the change my mind thing, but I think the moon landing hoax is a hoax, is what I like. Okay. I mean, this is the result. This is society that's starting to rot. When you start believing in things that have been not only known to children, but which are being used every second of the day. There are, at the present time, hundreds of thousands of people who are proving that the Earth is not flat, and I'm one of them. I've flown around the world. Now they say it's circular and we're just flying out to the edge. Does anybody know how they explain that, by the way? If the Earth is circular and we fly from, if it's flat, and we fly from North America to Australia, and we keep going, what happens then? Does it wrap? In other words, if we fly off the map here, do we appear over here? I don't think that anybody's claiming that. If we fly from Los Angeles to Australia and we keep going, do we hit the wall of ice? Because you would think that if that were true, that would be a relatively easy thing to get some pictures of. Jimmy Stewart qualified in a B-58? Yes, it's mainstream. Cheryl's got it right. It used to be the stuff of trolls and idiots. Now it's mainstream. And that's a great point. I think what I probably need to do is, yes, Burt Rutan designed an airplane that flew around the world. His brother Dick flew it with Jenna Yeager. Dick stayed awake for 9 days. Dick said there were times, and I heard this from him directly, where he would look at the instrument panel, and the instrument panel was like bowing out, like it was inflated with air, just bowing right in front, and he saw gremlins out on the wings and all the rest of these hallucinations. And you know what it is? It is part of deconstruction, because I think the way you have to close something like this is you have to say, if you're going to buy that this moon landing thing was a hoax, in the face of all this evidence, what you're basically saying is that nothing is provable. That nothing is provable. Nothing, and if nothing's provable, then nothing is real. That's basically what you're saying. You're saying that there is nothing real other than what's going on inside your head. Because if something is real, then you can interact with it. And if you can interact with it, you can get data from it. What does it weigh? What color is it? What shape is it? But if you can go from the fact that that thing out there, that block of, that stone out there in the yard is actually real, and I know it's real because I can touch it, I can measure it, I can find out how much it weighs and what it's made of. Then you're saying that there are things I can know about that rock outdoor that are knowable, repeatable, constant, and therefore true. So if I can, this is a great argument. I just do this. Sometimes it's just, this is why I talk out loud. It just helps me a lot. So basically, if you believe the moon landing didn't happen, then you really end up believing that there is no rock outside your house buried in the grass. There is no grass. There is no house. You have to believe that. Because if you say there is, well, of course there's a rock. Then what you're saying is, you know there's a rock because you went to it, you measured it, you touched it, you analyzed it, you found it, right? There's physical evidence of the rock, right? Well, there's physical evidence for all the rest of this stuff. All of it, all of it. There's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of rocks. There's mountains of rocks to the moon of evidence. And if you're going to ignore all of that evidence, then you are also ignoring the ability to say that this is a rock. It's not a rock, it's a figment of your imagination. Everything is a figment of your imagination. We're all figments of your imagination. There's a word for this, I've forgotten what it is. This is where you got to get them. You got to get them. You cannot, I do not plan to make this case using reason. I plan to make this case using emotion. Solipsism, that's what I was looking for. Let's consult the handy Oxford Dictionary app. The view or theory that the self is all that can be known to exist. Oh my God. Roy Hamill has spent the last 2 hours Roy, can you tell me if how many calculations that is, and can anybody give me a rough estimate of what one frame of a video game is compared to the moon landing in terms of the total math? Because you can do the math in your head. Hey, Foghorn, you said you did it in your head. Did you have a slide rule, or were you just having to do the math? Anyway, I really did need to get that kind of limbered up out of my system. Now, it turns out we have a link to our members page at BillWhittle.com. We'll take one or two from there, and we'll do a long show. What the hell? I've missed a few things lately putting this thing together, and it seems the least I can do. So we'll take a couple questions from there. We'll go back and forth with the Facebook page. And thanks to Scott Ott, as always, for setting up this thing. Here it comes. Here it comes. I'll try to make these relatively quick. Brother Bob, it's the first one there, says, I've been throwing this question to you guys since the days of Trifecta. Well, Bob, you have my sincere apologies for making you wait that long. I'd love to hear our take on it, or even better, the three guys' take on it. It's a technicality statement, but it comes more timely with each passing day. Quote, it will be a great day in America and an equally horrible day in America when Democrats come to hate the people who want to murder them as much as they hate conservatives. Well, the answer, I think, my response, I don't know if it's the answer to that, Bob, but my response would be there will never come a time when they will hate the people who are trying to murder them more than they hate conservatives. Because in order for that to happen, They have to accept the fact that there are people that hate them and want to kill them. And this is the thing that they cannot comprehend. They understand that people like that exist, but the motivation is utterly beyond them. And so what they do is they make sure that whatever motivation a terrorist might have is a result of our actions. And since it's a result of our actions in our war for oil or whatever particular lunacy you want to insert there, since they're angry at us for what we do, two things are apparent here. First of all, they're not really people. They're just reflections of us. That's the assumption, that bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they're just reflections of us. And they're only there because of America. And if America wasn't there, then there would be no need for ISIS or bin Laden, and everything would be cool and copacetic. The two things that are interesting about that is the inability to face the reality that people want you dead for no reason. And it is also extremely self-centered and infantile to assume that everybody else acts in order to motivate me, in order to change my behavior. The real reason they want to believe that it's our fault is because this idea scares them so much that if it turns out that Al-Qaeda exists because of what we're doing, then if we stop doing that, then they won't want to kill us anymore. So it's a safety blanket. It's a pacifier. And so there you go. Let's see what else we got here. Troy Stevens. We are too nice, it seems. I'm with you, brother. Not that I want to change that, but I'm with you. Contra the left's claims, we as a culture are kind, patient, and tolerant to a fault, as evidenced by the fact that we pay them to complain about us and brainwash our kids. How can we keep this rightly prized kindness of spirit, which seems to enable progressivism's incrementalist advance, from becoming our undoing? That may be the question of the age. Well, my first answer is to just kind of look at history and realize that good people, morally good people, because basically what you're saying is, you're absolutely right, the left is using our moral decency against us, our willingness to obey the rules, all of that stuff. They're using all of that against us. And so if we continue to be this forgiving and kind and tolerant and all these other things, which we actually are, then progressivism is like the HIV virus. It comes into the system and attacks the self-defense mechanisms. It makes you feel guilty for defending your own culture. It makes you feel guilty for being proud of who you are. It makes you feel that you live in the worst place in the world and that everything about you and your country and your existence is hateful. And so you are not willing to defend the republic, which means you're a white blood cell that's not able to defend the body. It's an autoimmune disease is what progressivism is. But I think the only answer to this is that it has been, it's been proven to my satisfaction. And I have I like to think I have a relatively realistic view of human nature. So this is not just wishful thinking on my part. I'm basing this on history. I believe that it is possible for people like us, for decent people who are mostly just want to be left alone, naturally friendly people who are more than willing to trade and all the rest of it. I believe it is possible for people like us to realize that we are in the kind of dirty fight where we either play by their rules or we lose. And that playing by this is the key point, because this is the point of your question. Playing by their rules means playing by their rules for the duration. It doesn't mean becoming them. It means fighting them on their level for as long as we have to. And so the critical point, the whole thing turns on whether or not you're capable of going back to the first condition if you decide to go to the second one. And I think we are. I know that the example I keep using, because I can't think of a better one, is that In the Pacific, we fight the Japanese, and at first, when they surrender, and I mean at first, I'm talking about first days in Guadalcanal, we have a moral code that says that once a soldier's been wounded, he's out of action, and since he's no longer a threat, if we have the resources available, then we should treat him, and that we no longer have a fight with this particular guy because he's no longer a combatant. So we send medics out to attend to wounded Japanese, and it turns out that when the medics and stretcher bearers get there, the guy's holding a hand grenade and kills himself and takes 4 or 5 Americans with him. And when this happens all the time, not just once, when it happens all the time, any adult can make the moral calculation here. Their behavior is forcing me to abandon my fundamental humanity because they are going to use that to kill me. And that's my choice. I can either be a compassionate person, I can either be a dead compassionate person, or a living person who's made the conscious decision that the morality that I would apply to just about anybody does not apply to these people based on the fact that their ethical system's completely different than ours. So the Marines ended up fighting the Japanese the way the Japanese fought the Marines. They didn't start it, and they didn't lead with it, but they sure ended with it. And that's what I would say. My point is that if you're a Marine in World War II and you had to fight that kind of brutal war, millions of them did, and not just in Japan and Germany as well. And while I think the entire greatest generation, the ones that were actually deployed, now I'm not talking about I'm talking about the people actually in uniform. And I don't even mean in combat, I mean the ones who are actually just in uniform. I think that the greatest generation on some level really did suffer from a form of PTSD. Obviously, that doesn't apply to every single individual, but if you want to generalize about it as a generation, I think the reason that they're so emotionally distant is that they had been so traumatized, not just by the war, but by the Depression as kids. And that was the price they paid for saving the world. But watching Americans come back from dealing with Japanese with those kind of strategies and tactics, rather, and coming back from seeing what happened in the death camps, they didn't come back home as monsters. They came back home as decent people. In other words, they were brutal while they had to be, but the fundamental goodness in them, I don't want to say it wasn't touched by that. I think it was. I think they had nightmares for the rest of their lives because of this. But it didn't own them. And in the microscopic number of cases where in World War II or Vietnam or whatever, a good man goes to Vietnam and comes back a murderer, those cases are so small that they essentially statistically don't exist. The tragedy is that what does statistically exist in a very significant way is that a lot of those people come back, and because they're so decent people and they don't want to hurt anybody else, they have no place to put this pain, so they end up killing themselves. As the federal government gets more and more intense and pushes more and more into our lives, and we fight against it more and more. I've been watching 10 years now as Abraham Lincoln has come under more and more and more fire from conservatives. And I just think that's wrong. Without question, Abraham Lincoln assumed a lot of dictatorial powers as commander-in-chief that were not authorized by the Constitution. And he was the first person to say it. He was the first one to admit it. And his bet, because that's what it was, his bet was that the country was strong enough to bend the Constitution in order to save it. And if it saves it, then perhaps it will unbend. But if it doesn't get saved, what difference does it make bending the Constitution? If it's broken, what difference does it make? So I think there's enough evidence historically for us, for Americans as a people. I can't speak for other peoples, but there are national characteristics that are caused by a lot of different things, climate and all the rest of it. But America's a nation of people who came here to be independent and who didn't want to be told what to do. And that is a kind of self-selection. And those people tend to be very kind and very decent. And until recently, kind and decent and tough. But when you take away all threats for 2 or 3 generations, you shouldn't be surprised to find a generation that thinks that threats don't exist. Let's go to the Facebook page, shall we? I saw 1 or 2 questions up there that looked really kind of interesting. Let's see what we got here. This show put everybody to sleep, puts me to sleep especially. Hang on, the page is loading. There we go. Come on, load. All right. Yeah, this was the one that I wanted to take just because I think it's cool. It's a little bit related to what we were talking about earlier. I think this one I'm going to just answer, and I think that'll do it, George, because we've been on this topic a lot, and I think it's a great question for this topic. But I think after that, it's probably time for me to go home and say hello to my beautiful wife. But it's a very interesting question. So what I see, and it's not the most highly rated question, just the top of the stack by coincidence or whatever they use to rank these things. Nevertheless, George A. Freeland, top fan, thank you, George, writes this. What are the best modern or futuristic battle scenes you've ever seen in recent movies? Have any of them captured a good sense of scale in terms of engagement distance and formation spacing? That's a great question. I'm going to assume we're talking about space combat, so we'll just keep it there. I have seen a couple, but I've never seen anything that is even remotely close to what I suspect it's going to look like. I think there are moments, and I've never watched the show because I frankly just can't bear it. It's got great effects, and it's just, I don't know, it's just something about the cast and the sets and stuff. But The Expanse captures a pretty decent sense of zero-G mobility. The idea that you can launch yourself on a vector and then change position and fly sideways, backwards, upside down, whatever the case may be. So The Expanse has some of that. The first movie I remember seeing with that, I want to say The Last Starfighter, had some vague sense of Newtonian physics and stuff like that in terms of realism. But as it turns out, the reason I wanted to take this question, probably end on this question, is this is something I've given a great deal of thought to. And I'll just caveat this by saying I'm sure that what I'm about to say is going to be is going to look as realistic as the Buck Rogers stuff or Flash Gordon did, the serials with the silver underwear. We just don't know. But in any event, if I had to predict what space combat would look like, here's the one thing I can say uniformly about it, about everything I've ever seen, ever. And that is that the distances are insanely short. And Star Trek, the original Star Trek, was the only show I've ever seen that didn't do that. The original Star Trek was the only show I ever saw where the ship fired weapons at a vessel that was not, within slingshot distance. They may have to, undoubtedly had to do with the special effects, but you'd see the Enterprise firing its phasers or photon torpedoes, and then you'd see the Klingon ship or the Romulan ship getting hit, but you wouldn't actually see them in the same frame. And then by the time you get to Next Generation, you've got these warp-capable, antimatter-driven miracles fighting battles at a half a mile range. And it's just absurd. And what's even worse is that unlike the original series, once we got into computer graphics, or I think Next Generation was using motion control on models, I'm pretty sure. But in any event, once we had the technology, somebody somewhere decided that capital ships, like the Enterprise, would start to behave like fighter jets. In order to make it interesting, they couldn't stay straight and level like they did all throughout the Wrath of Khan battle, which I think is the best science fiction battle I've ever seen in terms of drama. It's not the most realistic, but there are elements of it. If you look at the Wrath of Khan, there's never a point where down isn't down, and where the two vehicles are not behaving like ships. So as you get more and more into the stuff, I saw the Prelude to Axanar, which is the best science fiction fan effort I've ever seen, which looks like it's back on again. If you haven't seen it, it's a magnificent trailer. The reason CBS decided to squash that one and not any of the other fan films from any other franchise is because Prelude to Axanar is precisely what Discovery should have been. It's exactly precisely what it should have been. It's before the original series. It looks like it belongs before the original series. The uniforms look like they belong. The spaceships look like they belong. It's fantastic. But the one thing I really hated about and found almost hard to watch about the Axanar trailer was that these battles between these capital ships, they turned into dogfights. They just turned them into dogfights. It's ridiculous. But think about the engagement range. I mean, seriously, think about it. Imagine a frame from virtually anything you've ever seen where you have two ships in the same frame. You're talking about an engagement range of a mile, maybe? How far are the 5? 2, 3 miles? You know? I mean, our Phoenix missile was a 300-mile over-the-horizon missile. And that was to detect airplanes flying nose-on in the atmosphere over the curve of the horizon. You're talking now about 300-400 years in the future, and you've got this big honkin' flying bank out there, it's the size of an office building, and we're shooting at it, and sometimes we hit it, and sometimes we don't. It's just laziness. It's the kind of thing I've talked about before from writers. It's laziness. They don't want to, or they're not capable of doing the work to really think these things out. And so they go with the easy stuff, which makes audience go for it. But if you had the discipline to really think it out and show people something they'd never seen before, which is what I'm going to get to, then I think people would believe it. Because if you showed them something they'd never seen before, the audience would know it was something never seen before, and it would feel real. I've mentioned before how much I loved Crimson Tide, and how 4 minutes into the movie I said, I don't know who the technical advisor on this show was, but whoever it was knew what they were doing. Turns out it was a former commander of the USS Alabama, because the language that they use in Crimson Tide doesn't make any sense at all, unless you happen to be on board a nuclear-powered ballistic missile sub, in which case spin-up tubes 1 through 12 means something. On the 1MC means something. Con sonar means something. And this is the point. This is the real point. You don't have to know. I'm talking about the audience now. The audience, George, doesn't have to know what those things mean. You'll be able to deduce what they mean, but you don't have to know what they mean. In other words, when you see these guys getting all tensed up and getting ready to go, and he says, on the one MC, this is the captain, spin up tubes 1 through 12. You don't have to know what that means. but it sounds real because it is. And then, and then you believe from the expressions of the actors' faces that this is going to be bad. That undoubtedly this is how you launch a nuclear missile. You don't have to know, but if you say what it really is, people will believe it because it sounds real. And so I maintain that really works. And I've been talking about this for a long time. If Crimson Tide had not been that technologically accurate, nobody would have missed it. But it wouldn't have been nearly as successful because even though nobody would have missed it, because they wouldn't know that they were missing it, the fact that it was there really took you into the movie and kept you there. My favorite part of that, just in terms of this storytelling, one of my favorite parts of any movie ever, is when they get the message from the, was it ELF, the extremely long frequency thing, able to reach submarines under the water with a very, very, very long wavelengths. Takes a long time. But when they get the decoded message, and you see these guys doing the thing with the key, and it's in a plastic container, and then they snap this thing in half, and they're holding it above their head as they walk through the control through the combat control center. Holding it above their head, I thought to myself, why the hell are they holding it above their head? And I realized they're holding it above their head because that is the procedure, and the reason it's that procedure is because if you're holding it above your head the whole time, you can't switch it with one in your pocket if you're determined to start a nuclear war through just being a rogue lunatic. And so they would say something and say the message is Alpha Charlie Delta Delta Lima Foxtrot X-ray, and then the guy standing right next to him, the executive officer, would say, I concur. It's 5 letters, 6 letters. Of course you can read it, but you've got 2 guys saying, yes, this is a correct interpretation of the message. This is the message. It says the letters. First officer says, I concur. And then the captain says, the message is authentic. And it's a step-by-step procedure that actually builds drama. It doesn't bore people. It builds drama. They don't know exactly what it means, but they know that some kind of a ritual is going on here, and that something very important is going to happen because Gene Hackman, who's usually just, this bundle of energy, is now he's like absolutely tightly controlled. He's like, I concur. The message is authentic. Okay, well, that sucks badly. That means that we have an actual launch order now. So now what do? Well, now we spin up tubes 1 through 12 and get ready for launch. It's a textbook example. I think it's the best example I've ever seen of what non-lazy writing can do, and how if you are willing to do the work, it will pay off. Sometimes it's stuff that's just so small that nobody would notice it except for pilots. I remember seeing, I don't know what it was, as Iron Eagle or something like this, some fighter movie where a guy gets cleared to land on runway 72. Cleared to land runway 72. You want to take that one, Foghorn? Still here? Can you tell me why hearing a fighter pilot get a clearance to land at an Air Force base and clear to land on runway 72 is a bit of a problem? Yeah, Exnor gets it. And I'm going to get 50 people getting it. I'm going to give Foghorn another minute or two. He's probably already gone off to start a nuclear war or whatever the hell he does in his free time. Top Gun, yeah, also crap. Well, I know a lot. I know these guys know, and I'm not going to wait. I'll just tell you. The reason you can't land on runway 72 is there is no 72. There is no runway 72. And the reason there's no runway 72 is because a runway number is a function of the heading of the runway. In other words, it's a compass heading. So runway 36 is heading at 360 degrees. If you're landing on runway 36, you are heading due north when you land. If you're landing on runway 09, you're heading directly to the east. If you're landing on runway 18, you're heading 180 degrees at south. If you land on runway 27, you are heading to the west. Runway 32. And so with a circle that has 360 degrees on it, you can have a runway from runway 01 to runway 36, because they're not going to hold digit off. But there is no runway 37 or anything above it. It's just fundamental. But when I hear it, yeah, Exner says it means you have to fly the pattern twice. That's exactly right. Around one time, land on runway cleared for runway 72. So I'll just take runway 36 then, and then I'll just go around. Is that what we'll do? That's hilarious. So this kind of thing is like, does the average audience member know that? No, they don't. Are they going to sit up in their chair like I did and laugh? No. But likewise, they're not going to be drawn into a story the way they would be if somebody really knew what they were doing. And it sounded real. So it's the kind of thing you don't miss it if it's not there, but if it is there, you get a big benefit. So with all of that preamble, let me tell you a space combat scene that I wrote for the second one of these Aurora movies, not the video game stuff. I was going to call it Ice Station Series, and I may yet do it. You never know. The CG is certainly getting better and all that stuff. But in any event, I had an idea for a battle. Now, I don't know whether I subconsciously took this from a movie that I thought was incredibly impressive when a kid, and then when I saw it again as an adult, I was absolutely convinced they'd remade the movie, because it couldn't possibly be as bad as it was in front of my adult eyes. But it was a movie called Battle Between the Earth, and it was about Battle Beneath the Earth, and it was about the Chinese having these laser tanks, and they were cutting tunnels under the surface to come and invade America. And they'd been working on this for a long time, and they had these really advanced things. And then when the Americans find out that they're coming, they have to slap together something to go out and do the work that this laser boring tank does. So here's how my space combat scene worked. I had to figure out ranges. I had to figure out realistic encounters based on not having unlimited fuel, having enough fuel to be a combat ship and not having unlimited fuel. I had to figure out which kind of strategy you wanted to use, and I'll leave all of that aside. That's another hour right there. But what I ended up with was a Chinese ship that was really pretty massive. In fact, it had a giant sphere in the middle of it, and guys thought, well, it's a fuel, is that a giant fuel container? It's a lot of fuel. And it turns out that we don't discover really until the battle. We expect, I'm going to invent a number. I actually had the right number. They're going up to fight this Chinese ship, and based on what they think they can deliver, they're sure it's got energy weapons, laser weapon. So the Americans do a calculation on how powerful that laser could be based on the ability to cool it. And let's just say for the hell of it, it's 3 gigawatts. Well, the 3 gigawatt laser becomes lethal at a certain distance, and the closer you get, the more dangerous it becomes. So that sets a radius on that Chinese ship that is its effective range. In other words, if you get inside this circle, now you're close enough to the laser for the laser to deliver enough energy to start to hurt you. But, see, this is a reversal, and this is interesting storytelling. It turns out that giant sphere in the middle of the Chinese ship wasn't fuel. Well, it could be used as fuel. It was water. And even though it was enormously heavy to move, the water was the only way that they could cool that laser enough to have a really big laser and fire it enough times so that they could actually do it. Because getting rid of heat in space is almost impossible. A vacuum thermos works because vacuum doesn't transmit heat. Air molecules move heat away, or water does a much better job because it's 600 times denser. But so the reversal I had was that we knew the Chinese had a ship, big ship, with a reactor, big crew, heavy, lots of fuel, but not as agile, and we had an estimated range of how much we could take in terms of our defenses and so on. And then I decided, all right, well, what are we going to do with the Americans? Well, the Americans are going to go out and they're going to go with something different. They're going to have a couple of, let me think about this. Let me just think about this. I'm trying to remember something here. Because this was a reversal as well. Yeah. I think what I had was the American ship was going to use a magnetic mass driver and was going to shoot a slug, piece of steel, that wide and that long. But if you get that thing going fast enough, if you've ever seen the electromagnetic cannons that they've got on the Navy stuff, the railgun has the advantage of delivering an enormous amount of energy. You hit something with a slug that size going as fast as it'll go, and you'll pretty much kill the ship. You'll put a big, big hole in it. Energy weapons, on the other hand, are, if you ever watch them intercept an incoming missile with a laser, they have to keep the laser on that missile for quite a while, like 4 or 5 seconds, something like that. So the American approach is that we're gonna punch hard, but because that slug is even though it's traveling pretty fast, let's just say for the sake of it, it's traveling at Mach 10 or Mach 20, over the engagement ranges that I was talking about, which would be thousands of kilometers, that slowness means that unless you get very close, it's not a question of not being able to hit the ship. You could hit it from halfway across the solar system if everything stayed the way it is. But since they're maneuvering and you've got a mass driver and that slug is moving so slowly relative to the laser, which is moving at the speed of light, that means that the American ship has a very small radius. Chinese ship's got a big radius. The American ship has a small one. And when they get there and find out that thing's a water cooler, it turns out the Chinese radius is even bigger than they thought it would be. And so now we've got the case for some drama. Also, on the side of this thing, we're going to be, what did I have them? Were they fuel tanks or were they solid rocket boosters? I had something, had a number of attachments to the outside of this thing. So this thing's got this railgun. And so now we've got our fight set up. It's a classic problem in boxing. You've got a big, strong, heavy guy with a knockout punch. That's the Chinese, and long reach. And you've got a much smaller guy with a much shorter reach who can deliver a knockout punch, but he has to get inside. He has to get in underneath the far bigger fighter. He's got to get in there. And if he can do that, he can hit him hard enough to knock him out, but he's got to get in there. So the actual battle location in my story, was determined 4 or 5 days before the battle. They're on a trajectory. We're on an intercept trajectory. We don't have enough fuel to just go zooming around anywhere we want to. We want to fight. We're looking for a fight. They're looking for a fight too. I think if the other side doesn't want to fight, I don't think you have a space battle. I just don't think it's possible, at least not for the foreseeable future. But in any event, so here comes the Chinese ship on this orbit, here comes the American ship on this orbit, and we know that they're going to cross here, and we have an idea where we want to be. We know what we want that minimum distance to be, and we also know that the Chinese want that distance to be longer, because if it's longer, they can hit us, but we can't hit them. So we're watching these blips converge, and we see this little sphere of engagement ranges, and everybody on the ship, you build tension because now suddenly it's high noon. Now it's okay. Now we got another 2 hours and 14 minutes of life, and after that, we're probably not gonna go. So again, to spare you all of the details, they think that they're still outside of the range of this Chinese laser, and this laser hits them, puts a hole right through the hull. And that's when they realize that this isn't a 3 megajoule laser, it's an 8 megajoule laser, and they realize it's being water cooled. But they have defenses. So they stop popping the defenses. And one of the defenses is something that I liked an awful lot from the Traveler days, which was Dungeons and Dragons in space. Traveler had a beam defense, point defense called a Sandcaster. And I refined it just very slightly. Basically what it is it's a like imagine an oil drum size can of glitter. Just glitter. And you send it between you and the Chinese ship, and then you pop it, but you don't explode it real big. You just have enough to disperse it just a little bit, so that the laser beam has to come through this reflective cloud of glitter in order to damage your ship. Turns out that those particles are going to absorb enough of the radiation to really significantly lower the damage that can be delivered to your ship. And there's a little bit of armor, but not much because armor's heavy and so on. Yeah, so Astronerd 1 says it's chaff, but it's not chaff because chaff is used to decoy an incoming weapon. This is actually a shield. It's a physical shield to stop incoming laser radiation. So the American ship is just running down the throat of this Japanese ship, and they're trying to do all of these defensive maneuvers, and they're just getting pounded. They're just getting hit and hit and hit, and it's really just a question of we got to get in range of this, and we're getting ready to use our mass driver. And the Chinese had a spy in the American team, so they knew it was a mass driver. That's what it was. These two things on the side, these two mass drivers. So it's getting in close to make its mass driver attack, and when it gets close enough, finally, you get a reversal. And what you get while you're still, I don't know, at least several hundred kilometers away, probably more like thousands, if not 10,000s of kilometers away. We're taking these hits, we're putting up the defenses that we can, we're trying to get close enough to launch this mass driver thing, and then when we finally are still out of mass driver range, but inside a certain point, then the captain pulls the big surprise that the crew knew about. And what we discover is that these aren't mass drivers. These are missiles. And we had to get inside the range so that when these missiles come off, they split up into 6 or 7 pieces, and they're all just if you've ever seen Lockheed built something, and it's just, and these things are just randomly firing these control jets, and there's 6 of them inbound to the Chinese target, and one of the other attachments that were on the American ship, which is supposed to be something else, I honestly forget what it was. Turns out that's a solid rocket booster. And the second that the Americans let go of these missiles, they roll the ship 90 degrees and they light their main engines and they light these solid rocket boosters, and they immediately try to deflect their vector to keep them as far away from the Chinese laser as they can. Now, they had to get close enough because if you're farther out, the Chinese have more time to intercept these missiles. Shoot them down with their laser. So you got to get close enough. And then you use 6 of them, and they're all dodging and they're all maneuvering. And it's still because the laser's fast, and the Chinese are picking these missiles off one by one. Maybe they get 1 of them or 2 of them. But by the time they get to within a certain range, and we think that based on the speed that they're killing these missiles, that this attack is going to fail, then we get the final reveal, which is that these missiles are not contact missiles. They get within a certain range, and then the warhead explodes, and a shaped charge pushes, I don't know, 200-300 ball bearings, size of M&Ms, and that starts to expand into a cloud. And once 2 or 3 of these missiles pop off, the guys on the American ship look at this, and they know that they've won the battle. And the Chinese know that they've lost the battle because the dispersion of these pellets is such that the ship cannot maneuver out of that. It's a shotgun. So they know that this thing is coming. And sure enough, these hundreds of little metal spheres, like I say, about the size of an M&M, are moving at a tremendous velocity. The missile's given them a lot of velocity, but their closing velocity is enormous. So these things are coming in at thousands and thousands of miles an hour. And so they just plain riddle this Chinese ship. And since, again, it's drama, once these things are inbound and before they hit, the Chinese captain launches 2 missiles that he's got. And these are very, very, very high acceleration missiles. So now we got the situation where we've already killed the Chinese. It hasn't happened yet. It's kind of cool because it's like, you're not going to make it, but we've already shot this weapon that's going to kill them. And now they're trying to get off that kind of like that last torpedo. Now they're trying to get off a weapon that's at least going to kill us as well. And we've got a light ship and we're burning, and these guys are just deep in their couches and they're just pulling, 10, 12 Gs, and they're just trying to bend that vector away. And these missiles are coming up and they're trying to bend their vector to intercept. And as these things are closing and closing and closing, you've got literally two phalanx point defense systems, just machine guns. And a cool little part of that would be as they turn and fire, a little rocket has to keep shooting out the back to counteract the force of the recoil. it's just putting out these tracers. And finally, blows up one of these missiles. The other one's coming in and tracking it. And the Chinese missile gets close, and it detonates. And it's a nuclear missile. And it gets very close, and it detonates. And there's no blast effect in space, because blast is a wall of air. And so you see just this blinding flash of light. And then as the American ship is rotating, you see that this whole side of the hull has just been blackened by the heat. This thing was close, like, half a mile away, something like that. And the American ship is rotating, looks dead in space, and you see this whole side of the thing is just all charred and black and stuff. And as the thing starts to rotate out, comes around into the daylight, you can see the edge of the burn area and see that there's a little bit of a blade of material there. And as this thing rotates into the sunlight, you see the letters like United States, that the U.S. has been burned off, but the rest of the United States and the flag is there, and it's half burned, and it rotates around. And, it took the hit. And good guys win. And I've never seen anything like that before. But that, to me, is not only interesting writing, it's dramatic writing, because there's nothing more drama. Suspense is better. Suspense is the knowledge that something bad is going to happen. That's what suspense is. Any kind of a suspense movie, you look at a classic suspense movie like Psycho, you know that something bad is going to happen. And you know that anybody goes into that motel, something bad's going to happen. And you knew from No Country for Old Men that any time you saw Anton Chigurh, or whatever his name was, something bad was going to happen. And to me, this entire final battle, which is 20 minutes, is nothing like what you would expect, where these two ships are a mile or two away and they're lasers and shields, which everybody has seen thousands of times before. They're completely bored with it. I think if you show a shot of this American ship just blowing its way out of trying to change this vector, and you see against the starfield, you see a white point of light moving, I think that's cooler than that. Because you can show plenty of close-ups of the Chinese ship, but you say you can't even make the thing out with the naked eye. It's visible, but you can't make any detail. And that's realistic, and it's different, and it's cool, and no one's ever seen any of this stuff before, and it's just fantastic. It's just great. Yeah, spoiler alert. Well, if it turns out that this was a spoiler, then that's a high-class problem for me to have. This is one thing about Star Citizen that's really tough for a lot of us, especially tough for Foghorn, who's a real fighter pilot. You're at the year 2949 or something, and the engagement range is 400 meters maybe. And you're in these turning dogfights. But to be fair to Star Citizen, you're not in a magical turning dogfight. You've got a vehicle that's behaving with Newtonian laws, and you've got a flight control system that makes it behave a bit like an airplane. But that is thrusters doing the work based on inputs you give it. But these missiles in Star Citizen have a range of 5 kilometers. I don't know. I think it's time for somebody to make and I'm not done yet, kids. My motto for Aurora, and then for the second one, and then for the third one, is I had them both really, really well blocked out. And I still remember them, still have them blocked out. But my motto for those science fiction movies was real simple, and it was no magic. No magic. And that makes life tougher. No magic. That means no warp drive. It means no shields. It means no unlimited fuel, unlimited speeds. This world is in 3 dimensions. It's following vectors. You have a limited amount of delta that you can use to change those vectors. And if you use it up now, then you won't have it later. And one of the things that's important about that mission, by the way, that space battle I mentioned, is it's great if you can pull if you can pull. Okay, Fizz, I'll do that. If you can pull enough G's to get yourself out of the engagement range of this Chinese ship and survive the attack of the lasers and the attack of the missiles, that's just grand. But if that means you can't get home and you die in deep space, it's not exactly a win. Dave Big Booty says, no magic, that's why I love Babylon 5. I always hate to disagree, especially with somebody who knows what's going on with this stuff. Hey, how are you? We're good. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Anytime a wormhole opens, that's magic, as far as I'm concerned. So, no magic. Real travel times, real hibernation. Hibernation consisted of a medically induced coma and cooling the body. And I researched the living daylights out of this stuff. So that's that. Since we've been talking about space and Apollo for pretty much the whole night, Fizzmeister asked me to repeat my idea for a commercial. Several years ago, I say in the Apollo 11 thing that up until about 2-3 years ago, I did not think we were going back to the moon. I didn't think we were going to Mars. I thought we were pretty much done. I had a low opinion of millennials. To many degrees, I have that, but then I began to realize it's not millennials you have a problem with, it's the social justice warriors you have a problem with. There's lots and lots and lots of millennials who are in the military, lots and lots of millennials everywhere. But what changed my mind was the Falcon Heavy launch. I was there when Burt launched Spaceship One. I touched White Knight as it went by. I got to be friends with Mike Melville, friends with Burt Rutan. I saw 3 or 4 of those launches from Mojave, and I thought, this is the future. But that was in 2004. You know? That's 15 years have gone by, and nothing has happened since then. Virgin had a bad accident, obviously, and now they're doing tests to... They haven't even flown suborbital yet. It's 15 years later. In the 60s, in 15 years, we developed 20 different launch systems, us and the Soviets. Anyway, I digress. So anyway, back in before SpaceX started to convince me, and what convinced me about SpaceX and about the future was this. It was the sound. Let me back up. Spoiler alert for the Apollo 11 thing. I start the thing by talking about watching the moon landing, and I was in the Plaza Hotel in New York City. My dad's a hotel manager, so he's friends with hotel managers. He was certain that we would be in the United States in time to see the fake moon landing, and so we were in the Plaza Hotel, and I think the actual moon landing occurred about 4:15 Eastern time, but the moon walk didn't happen until about 10:45, 11 at night. And it was hot in the room. It was hot because the windows were open. And the windows were open because the Plaza Hotel, we were in the manager's suite, overlooks Central Park. And there were tens of thousands of people in Central Park watching the moon landing on these giant TVs. Yeah, it's over 3 hours. About time we haven't done one of these 3-hour ones in a long time. And when Armstrong took the step and said, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, there was a roar that came out of Central Park. It was a sound when I originally wrote the script, I said, that is a sound I'd never heard before. Before or since. And as I was doing the drafts on this thing, I thought, that's not quite right. You have heard this sound once before. And the only time I have heard that noise, I've heard, how many times have you heard cheers? You got to... football games, events, any kind, anybody. We've all heard cheers thousands and thousands of times in our lives, but this was different. I can't put my finger on it, but when I tell you what it sounded like, you'll know. I waited 48 or 49 years thinking that we were done, And then I heard that sound again. And then when I heard that sound again, I thought, no, we're going to be fine. And that sound, I strongly recommend that you tee it up as soon as I end the show. Listen to the sound that the audience of people who are in their 20s and 30s and early 40s make outside of the actual control room on SpaceX. Listen to the sound that the crowd makes when those two boosters come back and do that simultaneous landing. It's not just a cheer. It's a cheer that then goes, it's a cheer with afterburners. I'd never heard that sound before since. And, well, I heard it before. I heard it before on July 20th, 1969. But when I heard that sound, I realized, no, this is going to happen. And that spirit was still alive. And then I thought, okay, so this one's going to be a little different. I closed the Apollo thing by saying, the space race number 1 is over. Space race 2 is beginning. And this space race is going to be very different. Ours was essentially fighting a war with an enemy. This one, the coming up one, is not going to have that intensity. And it's not going to have quite the patriotism, and that's okay. What the new space race is going to be is it's going to be fun. And that was a thing I could not get used to. I had a hard time adapting to that. Seeing the people talking about the mission, wearing T-shirts and stuff, was tough, and I just didn't take it seriously. But when they launched Falcon Heavy, I realized that they're going to succeed, and the reason they're going to succeed is that anybody who puts up a cap. Do I have a 3-hour limit on this thing? It says it's still recording. Anyway, when I saw the guy in the Tesla Roadster, when I heard that Elon Musk as a test payload, I mean, it's basically could have put a slug of lead up there to see how much this thing's going to lift. When I heard he was going to put a red sports car up there, I thought that's genius. Then when I saw the sports car, and I saw the guy at the wheel with his elbow out the window like that, I thought that's even more genius. And then when they were playing David Bowie Move It, I thought, my God. And then when I saw the Don't Panic on the navigation screen, I just said, this time it's going to be fun. It's really going to be fun. And it is going to be fun. Any company that has a recovery vessel with the official name of course I still love you, that company's going to Mars, and going to go to Mars before the Chinese or the Russians or the Europeans or even before the American government. If you are loose enough and cool enough and having enough fun, and most importantly of all, if that company is still enough under the control of one person so that one person's vision can be executed and not done by committee, then they're going to get there for sure. And sooner than I ever thought. I'm going to live to see it. It's assuming I live to see the end of the Stratosphere Lounge episode, which is aging us all rapidly. But that sound, that scream that comes up from these people when those boosters land it's just chilling. It's magnificent. Just listen to it, because they're cheering all the way down, and the rockets are lit, and they're cheering. But when they actually land, it just goes up 3 octaves or something, and it's an astonishing sound. So they're going to go and they're going to do it. And the last thing I'll say is we had somebody who was a member of the Stratosphere Lounge crowd for a long time, haven't seen for a while, sent me a text after that mission and said, and this is how I closed the Apollo 11 thing. He said, that Falcon Heavy launch was our moon landing. And on the Apollo 11 show, I say, nah, that wasn't your moon landing. Mars landing is going to be your moon landing. You're going to do it. And all of us Apollo kids who grew up in the space age, we dare you to do it. We double dog dare you. And I think they're going to do it. I just wish it hadn't taken 2 generations. of going around in circles. Truthfully, after Apollo, for all of the space shuttle flights, Skylab, International Space Station, all of it, they are essentially, that's John Glenn's flight in Friendship 7 in 1962. It's the same flight. We're in low Earth orbit for 40 years. More. 45 years we spent in low Earth orbit. We're still in low Earth orbit. And that's the part that was utterly disheartening to me. Anyway, I don't want to close the show without bringing up why I brought this up. So, anyway, several years ago, I had this idea about something called the Free Frontier. It was going to be a crowdsourced space program, and I was very keen on the idea. And I don't mean this to sound sour. I really don't. It's not. It's going to sound more sour than I intended it to be. But I realized that when we couldn't get, more than a couple thousand people to be members at this little website, the idea of bringing in enough members to make something like that work, it just wasn't going to happen. Certainly I didn't have the means to do it. But basically, here's the commercial that I wanted to do for the Free Frontier, this crowdsourced space program. I wanted to show a lander on the moon, very realistic looking. It's not the LEM, it's bigger. It doesn't look super modern, but it's bigger and it's more advanced. And the moon looks exactly like the moon, because we've been to the moon. And you see a hatch open and you see this astronaut starts to back out of the hatch. And then you cut to people all around the world leaning forward, watching their flat screen TVs, and they're watching this thing in 4K. And this astronaut comes down the ladder and steps onto the moon. And then another guy follows him, and obviously you're intercutting all this stuff, and people tears in their eyes and stuff like that. And then you see them pull out one of their hammers, and they start hammering in this flagpole. And then you cut to this guy's saluting, and when he's saluting, as you pan around, you see he's saluting the Chinese flag. It's China landing on the moon. And that would kick every single American patriot right in the guts, even though they're 60 years second place. It's like, God damn it, this is the thing we all fear. So you're sitting there and people are crying, tears streaming down their faces, and you're watching these two Chinese astronauts plant this flag and salute the flag and basically do everything they did on Apollo 11. And after you see them starting to go about their business of working in that little lunar lander, the camera just slowly pans off to the side. And as they pan off to the side, there are two guys with their arms crossed, just kind of leaning against a buggy board, and they've got American flags on their shoulder. And then they say, "Okay, let's go." So then you see these guys get up and start driving over to these guys and said, "Hey, welcome. Glad you're here. We got hot showers for you." And you do a reversal, and back underneath the dome is this enormous city, and it says casino and hotel and all of this stuff. And the Chinese load their luggage onto the back of the buggy, and we drive them off to Lunar Vegas. I just loved it. I loved it. I thought it was great. That was just cool. And I actually think that's pretty much what's going to happen. Well, baby, I'm coming home. An hour and 15 minutes late, but I am coming home. So we'll be seeing a lot of promotion for the Apollo thing. There will be one more Stratosphere Lounge before the launch of the first one, which happens... No, wrong. Check my calendar. Nope. 2 days from now, on the 13th, Saturday, they're going to release the first part of this. I think they released one on the 13th, another one on the 15th or 16th, one on the 17th or 18th, and then part 4, which is the guts of Apollo 11, is going to be released on July 20th, 2019. I will, needless to say, send links out. And by the time we talk next Thursday, certainly 2 parts will be out. I expect 3 parts will be out, but the final part will not be out. The anniversary will be a few days away, and hopefully I can get this moon landing firewall written, because I didn't say anything about it in the Apollo thing. I just brushed against it once or twice. I just figured it's a waste of time to, the evidence is the incrementalism. Anyway, it'll be fun, and I think this thing's going to get some traction. I hope so. We'll see. God knows a lot of people put a lot of work into it, and it really shows it's all there up on the screen. So looking forward very much to hearing people's comments about it and talking about it next week on the Stratosphere Lounge. And then after that, the work will be done. The typical firewall is about 1,200 or 1,300 words. I don't remember what the exact number was, but I did the math. And when I was finished writing the scripts, the 4 parts for this Apollo thing, it turned into the equivalent, no fooling now. It was 38 firewalls long. It was 38 firewalls that I wrote for this thing in the space of 10 days, I guess. So, just goes to show you what you can do when, when you're motivated. I'm going to try and put a link to BillWhittle.com. Cheryl tells me we got a new member based on the trailer. Thank you. One of the things that I'm negotiating for is the ability to put out the script as an ebook, because the script is, they probably cut, 15% of it just for time. And I'm trying to find whether or not we can prepare a digital download. It's not like this thing won't be everywhere. It's going to be everywhere. And Daily Wire is going to run it on their site, and they're going to get all the hits, and they deserve it. They put a ton of money into it. But as a membership bonus, I would like to be able to offer the ebook. It's a thin book, but 42,000 words is 42,000 words. And I'd like to be able to have a link for members to digitally download all 4 pieces so that they can view them anytime they want to. If it had been even 2-3 years ago, I would have gone with a DVD, but the DVD requires making the DVDs, mailing the DVDs, all this stuff, and hardly anybody has a DVD player anymore. So, anyway, that's it. 9:20, not bad. 3 hours and 20 minutes. Not the record, but it's up there. So as always, thanks again for joining us. This show is made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com, and to those people, we are eternally grateful. Many of them are here right now watching live, and some of you watching on YouTube. I'm looking forward to showing off this this thing, and that is the term for it. Just show it off. I'm unspeakably proud of it, and I oh, this is the record, the longest one ever? Really? That surprises me. It's the best work I've ever done, and it's the most work I've ever done. So, starting on Saturday, 2 days from now. Yeah, 2 days from now, part 1 comes out. Then part 2 early in the week, part 3 late in the week, and then next Saturday, the following Saturday, part 4. And I assure you, you will not be hurting for places to see this thing. I'd love to hear your comments about it, and I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say, either on the YouTube thing, but probably at least on the Facebook page, and especially on the members page. That's the one I'm really looking forward to. It's just terrific. I mean, it's just it's my life's work. I actually had the thought somewhere in here. I think it was when I was writing the last part of the last piece. I actually had this strange thought, and the thought was, the reason you didn't get to go to the Air Force Academy and your vision in your eye and stuff, and the reason you didn't get a chance to do it was because somebody had to write this thing. And I probably have too much imagination to be a test pilot. In any event, I'm extremely proud of it. I think it's excellent, and the amount of work they put into costumes, makeup, lighting, photography, color balance, it's just, the set especially. I just think it's just really, really good, and I can't wait to hear people's comments about it. All right, honey, I'm coming home now. I know I'm late, but I've been on video surveillance camera for the whole time, so hopefully that'll soften the blow a little bit. Okay, that'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. Again, I guess we will see you next Thursday, and here comes that giant leap. Oh, and I told you they'd buy it.